I should have known something was wrong when my wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks late, forwarded from a neighbor's address, rain-damaged and bent. But nothing prepared me for what happened when I walked into my sister Sophie's reception. 200 guests sat on elegant ivory chairs with gold embroidery. Influencers, business partners, family friends, all perfectly positioned under crystal chandeliers. And then there was my seat, a cold metal folding chair, positioned near the kitchen door, partially hidden behind a decorative screen. I stood there holding my purse, the only person in the room without a real place at the table. That's when Sophie glided over in her $40,000 gown, her fiancé, Harrison, trailing behind. She looked at my folding chair and smiled not warmly, but with pure satisfaction. "I see you found your seat," she said sweetly. "It suits you, doesn't it? Simple, forgettable." Harrison laughed. "Only failures sit near the kitchen, April." The guests nearby turned to watch. Some whispered. Some smiled. They had no idea who I really was, what I'd built in the 10 years they'd erased me from their lives, or that I'd been secretly saving their dying family business for the past 3 years. I picked up my gift envelope, smiled calmly, and said just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Then I suppose the CEO's seat must be for someone else." What happened next destroyed my sister's perfect wedding, shattered my family's lies, and changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a folding chair became the most expensive seat my family ever gave me. My name is April Wallace. I'm 38 years old, and for the past decade I've built a career in private equity finance, the kind of work that happens in quiet conference rooms with closed doors where discretion matters more than recognition. Most people wouldn't know my name, and that's exactly how I've preferred it. I learned a long time ago that silence can be a form of power, that invisibility can be a choice, rather than a curse. At least, that's what I told myself during the 10 years my family forgot I existed. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in April, fitting given my name. I came home from work to find it wedged in my mailbox, bent at the corners, and bearing a forwarding sticker from the house 3 doors down. The envelope was cream-colored linen, expensive and elegant, with calligraphy so perfect it looked printed. But the rain had gotten to it during its detour through my neighbor's porch, leaving watermarks that bloomed across Sophie's name like bruises. Sophie Marie Wallace and Harrison James Carrington III request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration. I held the envelope in my hands for a long moment before opening it, already knowing what the damage meant. This wasn't a delivery error. This was carelessness elevated to an art form. My sister was getting married in 2 weeks, and her invitation to me had been so afterthought, so obligatory, that no one had bothered to check if it actually reached me. I opened it anyway, reading through the details. Saturday ceremony at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Black tie. Reception to follow. A small insert card listed me at table 52, which I knew without looking would be somewhere in the back, far from family, far from anyone who mattered. My phone rang before I'd even set the invitation down. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 4 months, not since I'd sent a birthday card she never acknowledged. April. Her voice had that careful, measured quality she used when she wanted something. "Did you get Sophie's invitation?" "It just arrived," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Forwarded from the Hendersons' house." A pause. "Oh well, you know how the post office can be. Anyway, I'm calling because, well, Sophie's been under so much stress with the planning, and we know you're very busy with your work, so if it's too awkward for you to come, no one would blame you. It's such short notice and all." There it was. The unspoken message delivered with maternal efficiency. "You weren't expected. You're not really wanted. But we sent the invitation because we had to." "I'll be there," I heard myself say. Another pause, longer this time. "Are you sure? Because really, April, if it's too much trouble..." "I'll be there, Mom." After she hung up with a distracted, Well, all right then. That made it clear she had more important things to attend to. I sat in my minimalist living room and looked at that rain-damaged invitation. I could have thrown it away. I could have continued my peaceful, successful, solitary life. I had a good job, financial security, a small circle of genuine friends who actually returned my calls. I didn't need Sophie's wedding. I didn't need my family's approval or acknowledgement or even their recognition. But that late invitation, that careless, damaged, forwarded as an afterthought invitation, ignited something I'd buried for a decade. It started slowly, this erasure. After I moved away for work 10 years ago, the phone calls became less frequent. First, it was weekly Sunday dinners I couldn't attend because I lived 6 hours away. Then it was holidays where I was welcome, of course. But the invitation came 3 days before Thanksgiving, too late to change my plans. Birthdays were forgotten, mine at least. Sophie's were still elaborate affairs that I'd see later in Facebook photos I wasn't tagged in. My father once told me during one of our last real conversations, "Your sister knows how to make people feel good, April. You just make them uncomfortable." He'd said it matter-of-factly, as if he were commenting on the weather, not explaining why he preferred one daughter over the other. My mother was more subtle. "Sophie has such grace," she'd say, usually while showing me photos of Sophie's latest Instagram post. Sophie at a charity gala. Sophie launching a new brand partnership. Sophie radiating the kind of warm, accessible charm that made strangers feel like friends. "You've always been so serious, April. So intense." What they meant was Sophie reflected well on them. I did not. Sophie called weekly with updates about her glamorous life, the influencer events, the sponsored trips, the growing follower count. I sent brief emails on major holidays. Sophie shared every achievement, every milestone, every perfectly curated moment. I kept my successes private, tucked away in quarterly reports and closed-door meetings that my family would never understand or appreciate. Eventually, the gap between us became a chasm. Then the chasm became permanent silence. I hadn't spoken to Sophie in 3 years. Not since the Christmas when I'd asked casually how her business was really going, whether the Instagram success translated to actual financial stability. She'd looked at me like I'd slapped her, then turned to our parents and said, "See, this is why I don't share things with April. She can't just be happy for me." After that, I stopped trying. I moved to Chicago, threw myself into work, and built a life that didn't require family validation. I told myself I was fine. I told myself their opinion didn't matter. I told myself that being forgotten was easier than being constantly disappointed. But sitting there with that damaged invitation in my hands, I realized I'd been lying to myself. I wasn't fine. And I wasn't going to let them forget me anymore. I booked a flight that evening, first class, though they'd never know. I arranged time off from work, which my assistant granted immediately with a knowing look that said she understood this was personal. I went through my closet and selected a simple black dress, elegant, understated, the kind that whispered rather than shouted. Nothing that would compete with Sophie's big day. Nothing that would give them ammunition to call me attention-seeking or inappropriate. I would attend this wedding with perfect dignity. I would sit where they put me, smile when appropriate, and leave quietly when it was over. And then I would close this chapter of my life permanently. They would never be able to say I caused a scene. They would never be able to say I was bitter or jealous, or couldn't be happy for my sister. They would simply have to live with the fact that they'd invited me, and I'd come, and then I'd walked away from them forever. As I set my alarm for my early morning flight, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. For just a moment, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "They'll never forget my seat this time," I whispered to my reflection. I had no idea how true that would turn out to be. The flight to my hometown gave me 6 uninterrupted hours to think about Sophie, which was approximately 5 hours and 59 minutes more than I'd wanted. But scrolling through her Instagram, an account I'd never followed but could view publicly, felt necessary, like studying an opponent's playbook before a game. Sophie Wallace, 2.3 million followers, verified blue checkmark, bio building empires in heels, grace and success, love and light. Her feed was a masterclass in aspirational living, each photo more perfect than the last. Designer dresses against marble backdrops. Champagne brunches at restaurants I knew cost $500 per person. Motivational quotes overlaid on sunset photos. Success isn't given, it's earned, and your throne is waiting, queen, but you have to build it yourself. Her engagement announcement from 3 months ago had gone viral. She stood in a floor-length white gown on a yacht, Harrison behind her, with his arms wrapped around her waist, a diamond the size of a quail egg, catching the golden hour light. The caption read, "He asked, I said yes, and our empire begins. To the man who sees my worth and matches my ambition forever, starts now." Hashtag power couple, hashtag building together, hashtag blessed. 43,000 comments. Brands offering to sponsor the wedding. Magazine interview requests. Marriage advice podcasts wanting her as a guest. I scrolled further back, watching my sister's curated life unfold in reverse. Luxury hotel partnerships where she posed in plush robes. Fashion brand collaborations where she promoted investment pieces that define your success. A particularly popular post from last year showed her in a business blazer at a desk, not her desk, I noted, but a staged photo shoot desk with the caption, "My parents taught me that success is built, not given. Every achievement in my life came from hard work, sacrifice, and refusing to settle. If you want the life you dream about, stop waiting for permission and start building." 12,000 comments praising her work ethic, her humility, her inspiration. I almost laughed. Sophie hadn't worked a traditional job in 4 years. Her empire was sponsored content and affiliate links, which was fine. Influencing was real work when done honestly. But the narrative she'd constructed, this story of self-made success and earned achievement, was pure fiction. Our parents had bankrolled her first 2 years of building her brand. They'd paid her rent, her car, her designer wardrobe, investments. When I'd asked them for help with graduate school applications years ago, they'd said money was tight. Meanwhile, I'd built my career the unglamorous way. 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst, sleeping in my office during deal closures, learning complex financial instruments while surviving on vending machine dinners. Moving up through sheer competence in a field where being underestimated was sometimes an advantage. Now I managed a private equity portfolio worth $800 million. I owned a penthouse in Chicago paid in full. My investment accounts could fund my lifestyle for 3 lifetimes. But I had no Instagram account, no public profile, no brand. The Wall Street Journal had mentioned me once in an article about rising women in private equity, but I'd declined to be photographed or quoted. In my world, discretion was currency. Silence was power. While Sophie collected likes and comments, I collected assets. While she posed with designer handbags, I owned equity in the companies that manufactured them. While she built an empire of appearances, I built an empire of actual value. But to my family, my silence meant I had nothing to show. I remembered the last Thanksgiving I'd attended 5 years ago. Sophie had just hit 1 million followers and couldn't stop talking about the brand deals flooding her inbox. Our father beamed, asking detailed questions about engagement rates and conversion metrics he barely understood. Our mother kept pulling up Sophie's photos to show relatives her pride unmistakable. When someone finally asked what I did for work, I'd said simply, finance, private equity. My father had nodded absently. "That's nice, dear." Then turning back to Sophie, "Now tell us more about this hotel partnership in Dubai." Later that evening, I'd overheard him talking to my uncle in the study. "Sophie's really made something of herself. Gets it from her mother's side, that charm, that way of connecting with people. April's always been so..." He'd paused, searching for the word. "Difficult, serious. She makes people uncomfortable, you know. Doesn't know how to celebrate life the way Sophie does." My uncle had murmured something diplomatic, but my father continued. "Your sister makes people feel good. That's a gift. April just makes them feel, I don't know, judged, like they're not measuring up." I'd left that Thanksgiving early, claiming work obligations. I hadn't been back since. The family had made their choice long before that conversation, though. They needed someone to showcase someone who made them look good, someone whose success was visible and shareable. Sophie gave them that. Her Instagram posts tagged them frequently. Grateful for parents who believed in me, and family is everything. She called our mother daily. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every minor family event. I sent cards on major holidays. Brief, polite. I didn't call weekly because what would I say I closed a deal that netted $18 million. I can't discuss it due to confidentiality agreements. I bought another investment property, they'd call it showing off. So I said nothing, and they interpreted my silence as exactly what they wanted it to mean, that I had nothing worth saying. My phone buzzed with a notification as the plane began its descent. Against my better judgment, I checked Sophie's Instagram one final time. Her latest post uploaded 20 minutes ago a photo of her in her wedding dress during the final fitting, radiant and perfect. The caption read, "Some people are born with class, others just rent it for special occasions." I stared at those words as the plane touched down and something cold settled in my chest. She'd always been good at subtext. The rental car pulled up to the family estate on Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wedding. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the house I'd grown up in, a sprawling colonial with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens that my mother had always been so proud of. Except now the gardens had been transformed into something out of a bridal magazine. White roses lined every walkway. An enormous tent was being erected on the back lawn, its white fabric billowing in the spring breeze. Catering vans crowded the circular driveway, and workers in black uniforms moved in coordinated chaos, carrying chairs and tables and what looked like thousands of additional flowers. I grabbed my small suitcase from the trunk, just enough for a weekend, and walked up the front steps. The door was unlocked, which didn't surprise me. My mother had never worried about security in this neighborhood, where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest scandal was usually someone's lawn service showing up on the wrong day. Inside, the entryway had been transformed into a shrine to Sophie's engagement. Enlarged photos covered every available surface. Sophie and Harrison on that yacht. Sophie and Harrison at what looked like a vineyard in Napa, Sophie, and Harrison dressed in formal wear at some gala. In every photo, they looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine, all white teeth and casual wealth. I set my suitcase down, the sound of it touching the marble floor echoing through the foyer. My father sat in the living room, visible through the wide archway, reading his newspaper in his leather armchair. He glanced up, made brief eye contact, and nodded once, a single nod. Then his eyes returned to the financial section as if I were a delivery person who'd dropped off a package. April. My mother's voice came from the dining room, distracted and distant. I walked in to find her surrounded by wedding planners and a florist, fabric swatches, and flower samples covering the long mahogany table. She looked up briefly, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Oh, you made it. That's good." She turned immediately back to the florist. No, the centerpieces need to be exactly 18 inches tall. Any taller and people can't see each other across the table. Sophie was very specific about this. No hug. No, how was your flight? No, it's been so long, let me look at you. Just a confirmation that I'd arrived the way she might confirm a furniture delivery. I stood there for a moment waiting for something more, but my mother was already deep in a debate about ivory versus cream for the table linens. I picked up my suitcase and began walking through the house, a stranger touring a museum of someone else's life. The changes were everywhere, subtle and not so subtle. The wall going up the main staircase had once been lined with family photos, school pictures, vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings. Now, every frame held Sophie. Sophie at various influencer events. Sophie receiving some kind of social media award. Sophie with celebrities I vaguely recognized. My graduation photo, the one where I'd worn my master's degree hood and smiled despite the exhaustion of finishing my thesis, was gone. In its place hung a blown-up screenshot of Sophie's Instagram hitting 1 million followers. I continued up the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister I'd slid down as a child. The hallway was the same soft cream color, but more photos of Sophie lined the walls. At the end of the hall, I turned toward my old bedroom, the one with the window seat where I used to read for hours. I opened the door and stopped. Ring lights on tall stands occupied 2 corners. A camera on a professional tripod faced a small staged area with a velvet chair and a minimalist desk. Racks of clothing, designer dresses still bearing tag shoes organized by color lined one wall. A full-length ring light mirror dominated another. My old bed was gone. My bookshelf was gone. Even the pale blue paint I'd chosen at age 13 had been covered with trendy millennial pink. This was Sophie's content creation studio, the place where she manufactured her perfect life for public consumption. I closed the door quietly and stood in the hallway processing what I'd known intellectually, but now felt viscerally I didn't live here anymore. I'd never lived here, not in any way that mattered to them. Walking back downstairs, I passed the living room where the family portrait used to hang above the fireplace. It had been our last professional photo together, taken about 12 years ago when I was still in college. I remembered the day how the photographer had struggled to get Sophie, then a restless teenager, to sit still. The portrait was still there, but it looked wrong. The composition was off, unbalanced. I stepped closer and realized why. I'd been cropped out. Someone had taken the original family portrait and digitally removed me, stretching the background to fill the gap where I'd stood between my father and Sophie. The edit was professional, but not quite perfect. If you looked closely, you could see the odd spacing, the slightly awkward distance between the remaining figures. They'd literally erased me from the family picture. Miss April. I turned to find Martha, our housekeeper of 20 years, standing in the doorway with fresh linens in her arms. Her weathered face broke into a genuine smile, the first warm greeting I'd received since arriving. Martha. I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She set down the linens and pulled me into a hug, the kind my mother should have given me. Look at you. Still so beautiful. Come on, I'll take you to the guest room. Not my old room, the guest room. I followed her down the hall to a small bedroom near the back of the house, the one we'd always used for my mother's visiting cousins. Martha set the linens on the bed and began making it up with practiced efficiency. I stood by the window looking out at the wedding preparations below. It's quite a production, Martha said quietly, tucking in the corners with hospital precision. Your sister has very specific ideas about how things should be. She always did. Martha paused, then moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I need to tell you something, and I probably shouldn't, but you deserve to know. She glanced toward the door, making sure we were alone. Last week the caterers came to finalize the seating chart. They counted 52 chairs. I reminded your mother that she'd forgotten to include you in the count. You know what she said? I waited, though I suspected I already knew. Martha's kind eyes filled with sadness. She said, "Oh, well, I suppose we'll find somewhere to put her." She squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, sweetheart. You deserved better than this family gave you. I smiled, and I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Thank you for telling me, Martha. Truly. She left to finish her other duties, and I sat on the edge of the guest bed, in a house I no longer recognized, in a family that had systematically erased me. The anger I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt something colder and more clarifying certainty. I'd needed this. I'd needed to see with my own eyes how completely they'd written me out of their story. That evening, my mother called everyone to dinner, a casual family meal before the wedding chaos fully descended. I came downstairs to find the dining table set for 4. My father at the head, my mother to his right, Sophie's place across from her, and then at the far end of the table near the kitchen door, a single place setting that looked like an afterthought. I picked up the small place card propped against the water glass, in my mother's precise handwriting, reserved kitchen side. I set it back down carefully and took my seat, the cold smile returning to my face. They'd chosen their side. Now I'd show them the cost of that choice. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Sophie floated down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, all silk and lace and strategic beading that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. The Grand Meridian Hotel had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, thousands of white roses, ivory draping that softened every surface, and enough candlelight to make even the most ordinary person look ethereal. Harrison stood at the altar looking every inch the wealthy heir he was, his family occupying the first 3 rows on the groom's side like visiting royalty. I sat in the back row, of course, far enough away that I needed to strain to hear the vows close enough to see my mother dab at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief while my father beamed with unmistakable pride. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Sophie's influencer friends immediately pulled out their phones, angling for the perfect shot of the first kiss. Then the ceremony ended, and the guests began flowing toward the reception hall adjacent to the chapel. I followed the crowd, trying to remain invisible in my simple black dress, while around me women wore gowns that cost thousands and jewelry that required insurance policies. The reception space took my breath away despite everything. More crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across white silk drapes that billowed slightly from hidden fans. A live orchestra, not a DJ, but an actual 12-piece orchestra, tuned their instruments on a raised platform. Each table was draped in ivory linen so fine it looked like water, and the centerpieces were architectural marvels of white orchids and roses that must have been 18 inches tall, exactly just as my mother had specified. And the chairs. Every single chair was an ivory dream upholstered in plush fabric with Sophie and Harrison's monogram embroidered in gold thread on the back. They looked like thrones for 200 guests. I searched for my name on the seating chart displayed on an enormous gilt easel near the entrance. The calligraphy was so elaborate it took me a moment to decipher the names. Table 1, Wallace and Carrington families. Table 2, Wedding party. Table 3, Harrison's business partners. I kept scanning, watching the table numbers climb. 10, 20, 30, 40. Table 52, nearly at the edge of the diagram, simply read, April Wallace. I followed the room numbers to find my spot, weaving between tables where guests were already settling in, laughing and hugging and taking selfies with the elaborate decor. Table 52 wasn't really a table at all. It was more of an afterthought positioned near the kitchen's swinging doors, partially concealed behind a decorative screen that I suspected was meant to hide the service entrance. And there was no ivory-upholstered chair waiting for me. Instead, someone had placed a folding chair. Cold metal, with a thin padding that had seen better days. The kind of utilitarian seating that caterers sat on during their breaks. I stood there holding my small clutch purse, staring at that chair, while around me 200 guests settled into their luxurious seats under glittering chandeliers. Women in designer gowns adjusted their jewelry. Men in custom tuxedos signaled waiters for champagne. The orchestra began playing something light and elegant, and I stood alone next to the kitchen door with a folding chair. The humiliation would have been complete in its silence, a private shame I could have absorbed and left with. But then I heard her voice. "Oh, April, I see you found your seat." Sophie glided toward me, her $40,000 gown rustling with each step, Harrison just behind her like an expensive accessory. Her makeup was flawless, her smile bright, but her eyes held something else entirely, something that looked like satisfaction. She stopped in front of my folding chair, regarding it with an expression of mock sympathy. "It suits you, doesn't it?" Her voice carried just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Simple, functional, forgettable." Harrison chuckled, the sound sharp and mean in a way that people who've never faced consequences often are. "Only failures sit near the kitchen, April." He looked me up and down, his assessment clearly finding me wanting. Couldn't even manage a real seat at your own sister's wedding. Guests at the adjacent tables turned to look. I saw a woman in emerald silk lean toward her companion and whisper something behind her hand. A man in a tuxedo raised his eyebrows and smirked. A younger couple, probably influencer friends of Sophie's, openly stared, and I knew at least one of them was recording. Sophie leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more violent than shouting. "You've spent your whole life in the background, April. In the shadows. Forgettable and forgotten. Today's no different." She straightened her smile, returning to its practiced perfection. "Enjoy the reception. The kitchen staff are lovely this time of year." She swept away Harrison, trailing behind her, moving toward the head table, where their monogrammed thrones waited under a canopy of roses. I watched her go, watched her greet her friends with elaborate hugs and air kisses, watched her settle into her perfect seat in her perfect dress at her perfect wedding. I looked down at the folding metal chair, at the gap between its thin padding and cold frame, at the way it sat isolated and obvious, a statement of my worth in this family rendered in cheap metal and vinyl. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that tears were wasted on people who couldn't understand their meaning. Instead, I picked up my clutch and walked calmly to the gift table positioned near the entrance. I'd brought an envelope cream-colored to match their wedding theme with a check inside. I placed it carefully among the other elaborately wrapped presents and cards bulging with cash. Then I smoothed my simple black dress, lifted my chin, and began walking toward the exit. I had to pass Sophie's table to reach the doors. She was holding court surrounded by her influencer friends, and Harrison's wealthy family champagne glasses raised in an endless toast to their perfect union. As I approached, conversations faltered, heads turned. The orchestra played on, but our corner of the room fell into expectant silence. I stopped. Not at Sophie's elbow where I might be dismissed or ignored, but directly across from her, separated by the expanse of ivory linen and orchid centerpieces. She looked up, her smile frozen in place, uncertainty flickering across her perfect makeup. "Thank you for the chair, Sophie," I said, my voice clear and calm, carrying across the suddenly quiet tables. "I'll remember exactly where you put me." I turned then, addressing the guests who'd watched my humiliation with such interest. "Sometimes the best seat is the one you build yourself." The silence deepened, became heavy with confusion and dawning discomfort. I didn't wait for a response. I walked toward the ornate double doors, my heels clicking against marble with each measured step. The sound echoed in that frozen moment, sharp and final as a gavel. Behind me, I heard Sophie's voice crack with something between fury and panic. "She ruined my wedding!" I pushed through the doors and let them close behind me, sealing off the world where folding chairs defined worth and family meant nothing at all. The spring air hit my face as I stepped outside the Grand Meridian, and I took my first full breath in what felt like hours. The valet looked uncertain whether to approach me, probably confused by a guest leaving so early in the reception. I handed him my ticket without a word, and he jogged off to retrieve my rental car while I stood under the ornate portico watching limousines and luxury sedans drop off late arrivals who were about to walk into a reception that had just witnessed something they hadn't expected. What they didn't know, what I didn't know in that moment, was that someone had filmed the entire folding chair encounter. A guest I'd never met, a friend of Sophie's, had her phone out when my sister made her cutting remarks. She'd captured Harrison's cruel laughter, the guests' whispers and smirks, and most importantly, my calm exit and quiet words before I left. While I stood waiting for my car, that guest was already uploading the video to her social media with a caption that would change everything. But I wasn't on social media. I wouldn't be for hours. So I simply tipped the valet, slid into the driver's seat of my practical rental sedan, and drove away from the Grand Meridian without looking back at the fairy tale palace that had made me feel like a servant. I didn't head toward the airport. My flight back to Chicago wasn't until tomorrow afternoon, and suddenly the thought of returning to my parents' house, of sleeping in that guest room one more night, felt impossible. Instead, I navigated downtown to the Four Seasons, a hotel I'd stayed at numerous times for business. The kind of place where discretion was part of the service, where nobody asked questions if you checked in without luggage, where everything from the marble lobby to the Egyptian cotton sheets whispered quiet luxury that never needed to announce itself. The desk clerk recognized me immediately. "Ms. Wallace, welcome back. Will you be needing your usual suite?" Please. I handed her my corporate card, the black metal catching the light. Crownbridge Holdings LLC embossed in small letters that meant nothing to most people and everything to those who knew. She processed my card without comment, handed me the key, and gestured for the bellman. No luggage, I said quietly. Just send up the usual amenities, please. Of course, Ms. Wallace. Enjoy your stay. The suite was on the 23rd floor, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd grown up in, but never really belonged to. I kicked off my heels the moment the door closed, feeling the plush carpet under my feet. The simple black dress came off next, hung carefully in the closet despite the fact that I never wanted to see it again. I stood under the shower for 20 minutes, washing away the Grand Meridian in the folding chair and Sophie's satisfied smile. When I emerged, wrapped in the hotel's thick robe, room service had already delivered what they knew I preferred: green tea, fresh fruit, sparkling water. I didn't call anyone. My assistant knew I was away for a family wedding and wouldn't expect to hear from me until Monday. My few close friends understood that I processed difficult emotions in solitude. My phone sat on the nightstand, silenced, ignored. Instead, I opened my laptop and let myself sink into the familiar refuge of work. Crownbridge had 3 active acquisitions in progress, each requiring careful attention and strategic planning. I pulled up the latest financial reports from a manufacturing company we were considering purchasing, losing myself in balance sheets and profit margins and projected growth curves. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't play favorites. Numbers didn't seat you on folding chairs and call you forgettable. This was how I'd survived the past decade. When family disappointed me, work anchored me. When loneliness threatened to overwhelm achievement, gave me purpose. To someone watching from outside, I might have seemed cold, emotionless, someone who'd just been publicly humiliated at her sister's wedding, now reviewing spreadsheets in a hotel room. But this was my power. This quiet competence. This ability to compartmentalize pain and focus on what I could control. I worked for 3 hours making notes on acquisition strategies, sending encrypted emails to my team about Monday's board meeting, reviewing projections that would determine whether we moved forward with a $12 million deal. My empire was invisible to my family, but it was real. More real than Sophie's Instagram likes and brand partnerships. More substantial than my parents' pride in a daughter who'd built her success on appearances. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. Mystery woman's wedding exit goes viral, who is she? I stared at those words, not understanding. I picked up my phone, clicked on the notification, and found myself watching a video I hadn't known existed. There I was, standing next to that folding chair, Sophie approaching in her expensive gown. The audio was crystal clear, her cutting remarks about my seat being simple, functional, forgettable. Harrison's casual cruelty about failures sitting near the kitchen. And then my response. My calm exit, my final words about building your own seat. The video had been viewed 4 million times in the past 6 hours. Comments scrolled endlessly beneath it. Who humiliates their own sister like this? That woman has more class in her exit than the bride has in her whole wedding. The way she walked out with her head high, that's real dignity. I want to know who she is because she's my new hero. I set the phone down carefully, my hands steady despite the racing of my heart. What had been meant as my private humiliation witnessed by 200 of Sophie's closest friends and family was now public, visible, undeniable. And people weren't sympathizing with Sophie. I closed my laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, my family was probably still at the reception, probably just discovering that Sophie's perfect wedding had taken an unexpected turn. My phone buzzed again, another alert, then another. The folding chair had become something neither Sophie nor I had anticipated. It had become a symbol. I woke the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, which was unusual considering fewer than 20 people had my personal number. I'd silenced my phone before sleeping, And now, in the bright Sunday morning light streaming through the hotel windows, I scrolled through the notifications with growing confusion. My assistant, my business partner, 3 different colleagues from Crownbridge. Even my lawyer who never contacted me on weekends. The messages all said variations of the same thing. Have you seen the video? Are you okay? Call me immediately. I made coffee using the Sweets espresso machine and opened my laptop, typing my name into a search engine for the first time in years. The results made me set down my cup carefully to avoid spilling it. The video from last night had exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. 15 million views, trending on every social media platform. But it wasn't just the video anymore. It had become something bigger, something I hadn't anticipated and couldn't have orchestrated. Women everywhere were sharing their own stories. The hashtag folding chair moment had taken on a life of its own, with thousands of posts from women describing times they'd been dismissed, underestimated, or literally and figuratively given the worst seat. A corporate executive posted about being excluded from partner meetings. A professor shared how her family still introduced her as just a teacher despite her doctorate. A CEO wrote about her mother seating her at the kids' table at Thanksgiving while her less successful brother sat with the adults. My video had become a catalyst, a symbol for something much larger than one sister's cruelty at a wedding. Talk shows were discussing it. I found clips of morning programs debating family favoritism and sibling dynamics. A psychologist was explaining the long-term effects of parental preference. A columnist for a major newspaper had written a piece titled, "The Folding Chair We All Remember When Family Makes You Invisible." Comment sections overflowed with personal stories, with anger, with recognition. And Sophie's Instagram, her carefully curated empire of 2.3 million followers, had become a battlefield. I pulled up her profile, which was still public despite everything. Her wedding photos posted late last night in what must have been an attempt to reclaim her narrative were drowning in critical comments. Is this how you treat family? That dress cost $40,000, but you couldn't afford your sister a real chair. Imagine being so insecure that you have to publicly humiliate your own sister to feel superior. But what surprised me most was that nobody knew who I was. The video showed my face partially enough to see my composure, but not enough for clear identification. Media outlets were frantically trying to find me. I watched a news segment where a reporter interviewed wedding guests outside the Grand Meridian. "Do you know who the woman in the video is?" the reporter asked a young woman in designer sunglasses. "I think maybe the bride's sister. But I'm not sure. Nobody really talked to her. She wasn't at the family table or anything." Another guest, an older man, shook his head. "I didn't even know the bride had a sister until I saw the video. She wasn't mentioned in any of the toasts." That detail seemed to fascinate the media more than anything else. The narrative had crystallized a woman so thoroughly erased by her own family that even their 200 closest friends didn't know she existed. It made the cruelty more profound, the folding chair more symbolic. My phone rang. My assistant for the 4th time that morning. I finally answered. "April, thank God. Have you seen what's happening? I'm watching it now. Everyone's trying to find you. PR firms, media outlets, talk shows. They all want to know who you are." She paused. "What do you want me to tell them?" I thought about that question while watching another news segment speculate about my identity. "Nothing. Tell them nothing. I have no comment. Your silence is making this bigger, you know. People are more curious because you won't respond." "Good," I said quietly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Around noon, Sophie posted a statement. I read it twice, analyzing the words the way I'd analyze a contract. "Family dynamics are complicated. My sister chose to make a scene at my wedding instead of celebrating with us. I wish her well on her own journey." The response was immediate and brutal. Comments flooded in faster than Sophie could delete them. "She made a scene by sitting quietly on a folding chair. You're still blaming her for your own cruelty. This is the most tone-deaf response possible." I watched in real time as Sophie's follower count began dropping. First by hundreds, then thousands. Her carefully constructed image, built over years of perfect posts and aspirational content, was crumbling in hours. By mid-afternoon, she'd deleted the statement, but screenshots had already spread across every platform. Deleting it only made her look worse, more guilty, more aware that she'd miscalculated badly. Then the brand partnership started falling apart. A cosmetics company posted a vague statement about reviewing all influencer relationships to ensure alignment with company values. A luxury hotel chain quietly removed Sophie's sponsored posts. A fashion brand deleted their collaboration announcement from 2 weeks ago. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Wallace, this is Harrison Carrington's mother. We need to speak urgently about managing this situation. The family is very concerned about the negative attention. I deleted it without responding. That evening, my assistant called again. April, you need to see this. Morning America just posted an announcement. I pulled up the network's social media. The post was simple, just one line that made my coffee go cold. Tomorrow on Morning America, we found her. The folding chair lady speaks. I stared at that announcement, my mind racing through possibilities. They hadn't found me. I hadn't agreed to any interview, which meant they'd found something else, some piece of my story that I hadn't controlled. And whatever it would air tomorrow morning for millions to see. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my hotel suite watching the city lights and mentally preparing for whatever Morning America had uncovered. At 7 a.m., I made fresh coffee and opened my laptop to their live stream. My hands surprisingly steady despite knowing my carefully constructed privacy was about to shatter. The segment began with the now familiar footage of the folding chair Sophie's cutting remarks, my exit. Then the anchor turned to a guest, an investigative journalist named Marcus Chen, who specialized in corporate finance and had won a Pulitzer 2 years ago for exposing offshore tax havens. Marcus, you've been investigating the identity of the woman everyone's calling the folding chair lady. What did you find? Chen pulled up a photograph on the screen behind him. It was me at a private equity conference in New York last year, standing in the background during a panel discussion, professional and unremarkable in a gray suit. Her name is April Wallace. April. She's 38 years old. And she's the founder and CEO of Crownbridge Holdings, a private equity firm based in Chicago. I watched the anchor's eyebrows rise. Private equity? That's significant. Very. Crownbridge manages approximately $800 million in assets. Over the past decade, Ms. Wallace has built a reputation in financial circles as one of the most astute investors in mid-market acquisitions. She identifies struggling companies, purchases equity stakes, restructures them, and either takes them public or sells them at substantial profit. She's known for being brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and almost pathologically private. The anchor leaned forward. So the woman who was given a folding chair at her sister's wedding is worth... Our conservative estimate puts her personal net worth at around $120 million. The studio fell silent for a beat. I could see the anchor processing this, recalculating everything the public thought they knew about the video. Chen continued pulling up more images. What makes this story even more remarkable is how invisible Ms. Wallace has kept herself. No social media presence. She's declined every interview request, every profile opportunity. These photos are from industry conferences where she attended panel discussions, but never as a featured speaker. She operates entirely in the shadows, which in her world is a form of power. Discretion is everything in private equity. But surely her family knew about her success. That's what makes the next part of this story so devastating. Chen's expression grew serious. 3 years ago, the Wallace family's manufacturing business faced bankruptcy. Richard Wallace, April's father, had made poor investment decisions that left the company drowning in debt. 200 employees were about to lose their jobs. The family legacy was about to disappear. He pulled up corporate documents, financial filings that I recognized because I'd signed them myself. An anonymous investor appeared operating through a shell corporation called Meridian Capital Trust. This investor purchased 60% of the company's debt, restructured operations, brought in new management, and turned the company profitable again. The Wallace family was saved. Richard Wallace has spent the past 3 years grateful to this mysterious benefactor who rescued his life's work. The anchor was already shaking her head in disbelief. Don't tell me. Public records filed last week show that Meridian Capital Trust is a subsidiary of Crownbridge Holdings. April Wallace was the anonymous investor. She saved her father's company, protected 200 jobs, and preserved her family's legacy while they were systematically erasing her from family photos and seating her on a folding chair at her sister's wedding. I closed my eyes, knowing what was coming next, knowing my privacy was about to become impossible to maintain. Chen wasn't finished. The cruelty here is staggering. For 3 years, Richard Wallace has been publicly thanking his guardian angel investor in local business interviews. Eleanor Wallace told a Society column last year how grateful the family was to the generous stranger who saved everything. Meanwhile, their daughter, the woman who actually saved them, wasn't even included in the wedding seating chart. Sophie Wallace built an influencer brand on the message of earning success through hard work, while her sister was quietly building an actual empire and using it to rescue the family that rejected her. The anchor turned to the camera. We reached out to the Wallace family for comment. Neither Richard nor Eleanor Wallace responded. Sophie Wallace's representatives issued a brief statement saying the family requests privacy during this difficult time. Harrison Carrington's family declined to comment, and April Wallace herself remains unreachable. Her office confirmed she's the CEO of Crownbridge Holdings, but stated she has no intention of making any public statements. Chen nodded, which is entirely consistent with how she's operated for a decade. April Wallace doesn't seek attention. She doesn't need validation. She built her success in silence, and even now, she's letting the facts speak for themselves. One final question, Marcus. The anchor's expression was thoughtful. Why would a woman this successful, this powerful, let her family treat her like nothing? Why not tell them who she really was? Chen smiled slightly. That's the question everyone's asking. And maybe the answer is that she didn't need them to know. She'd already proven everything to herself. Their opinion was irrelevant. The segment ended, cutting to commercial. I sat in my hotel suite, my coffee cold, watching my phone explode with notifications. My assistant, my business partner, board members, colleagues, and numbers I didn't recognize, which meant reporters had found my private line. Across town in the house I'd grown up in, I imagined my father watching that broadcast, seeing the corporate documents, realizing that the anonymous savior he'd praised for 3 years was the daughter he'd nodded at once before returning to his newspaper. I pictured my mother frozen in her perfect living room, understanding that while she was telling me not to come to the wedding because it was too awkward, I was literally keeping her lifestyle intact. And Sophie, whose entire brand was built on the illusion of earned success, now exposed next to my actual achievement. Sophie, whose Instagram empire was crumbling while my real empire, the one I'd built from 80-hour weeks and brilliant financial decisions, was being revealed to millions. My phone rang. A number I recognized. My father's office line. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother's cell. Voicemail. Sophie's number, which I hadn't seen in 3 years. Voicemail. They were finally calling. Finally reaching out. But not because they loved me or missed me or regretted what they'd done. Because now everyone knew who I really was, and they couldn't pretend anymore. I poured my cold coffee down the sink and made a fresh cup, my hands still steady. The question Marcus Chen had asked echoed in my mind. Why would a woman this powerful let her family treat her like nothing? The answer was simple, though I'd never say it publicly. Because I wanted to see exactly how far they'd go. I wanted to know definitively whether there was any love beneath the cruelty, any recognition beneath the erasure. And now I knew. I returned to Chicago on Monday afternoon, letting the city swallow me back into the anonymity I'd always preferred. My assistant had cleared my schedule for the week, anticipating that I'd need time to manage the media attention, but I went into the office anyway. Work had always been my refuge, and I needed the familiar rhythm of conference calls and financial analysis to ground me, while my family's world collapsed 6 hours away. My business partner met me in my office that first morning, back closing the door behind him with unusual care. "The Wallace manufacturing account," he said without preamble. "It's getting complicated." I'd been expecting this. "Tell me." He pulled up reports on his tablet, sliding it across my desk. "Two of their major clients terminated contracts this morning. Both cited vague concerns about business ethics and family values. Translation: they don't want to be associated with the scandal. Richard's banker called me directly off the record to express concern about whether the company's stability depended entirely on your continued investment. Industry contacts are questioning his judgment." He paused, meeting my eyes. If he couldn't recognize his own daughter's success, how sound are his business decisions? That's what people are asking. I scanned the numbers, seeing the implications immediately. Wallace Manufacturing was stable because of the restructuring I'd implemented 3 years ago, but confidence was a fragile thing in business. Once people started questioning leadership, clients fled and credit dried up. What's our exposure? Manageable. We own the debt, not the operations. If the company fails now, we'd recoup most of our investment through asset liquidation. But 200 people would lose their jobs. The employees. I thought about them constantly. People who showed up every day, who had nothing to do with my family's dysfunction, who depended on that paycheck. Monitor it closely. Daily reports. Over the next few days, I watched from a distance as my father's reputation crumbled in ways I hadn't orchestrated but couldn't prevent. A local business journal ran a profile with the headline, "Richard Wallace, How Missing What's in Front of You Can Destroy Everything." Industry colleagues who once sought his advice now avoided his calls. A speaking engagement at a manufacturing conference was quietly canceled. His identity had been built on being a successful businessman and respected father, and both pillars were collapsing simultaneously under public scrutiny that asked one devastating question. What kind of man doesn't recognize his own daughter's brilliance? Sophie's implosion was faster and more public. My assistant, who monitored social media despite my lack of presence there, provided daily updates I hadn't asked for, but found myself listening to anyway. A cosmetics line terminated Sophie's contract on Tuesday, issuing a statement about aligning with influencers whose values reflected their commitment to family and respect. By Wednesday, a luxury hotel partnership worth over $100,000 annually had disappeared, the brand quietly removing all traces of their collaboration from their website. Thursday brought the loss of a fashion brand deal that had been Sophie's largest endorsement. She's lost close to $400,000 in annual income. My assistant reported, her tone carefully neutral. Her follower count is down 300,000 and still dropping. The comments on her posts are brutal. I didn't ask her to read them to me, but she did anyway. You humiliated the woman who could buy everything you pretend to have. Your sister built an actual empire while you built a house of cards. How does it feel knowing she saved your family while you gave her a folding chair? Former friends in the influencer community were distancing themselves with the self-preservation instinct of people whose careers depended on public perception. Sophie's wedding photos, which should have generated months of sponsored content and brand opportunities, were now toxic. Every post, every carefully curated image was recontextualized by the folding chair moment. Her aspirational lifestyle looked hollow next to my actual achievement. There's more, my assistant added carefully. Apparently, Harrison has been spending a lot of time at his family's office, taking calls about reputational damage management. The Carringtons are old money. They care deeply about image and legacy. Having their name attached to this scandal is exactly what they wanted to avoid. I thought about Harrison's cruel laughter at the wedding, his casual dismissal of failures sitting near kitchens. Somewhere in his family's estate, he was learning that cruelty had costs even for the wealthy. But it was my mother's voicemails that revealed the true scope of their desperation. The first one arrived Tuesday morning, her voice tight and controlled. "April, you're making this worse than it needs to be. If you would just release a statement saying this is all a misunderstanding, we could move past it. Call me." By Wednesday, the control had cracked. Please, April, call me back. We need to talk about this privately as a family. Your father is very upset. Sophie is devastated. Let's discuss this like adults. Thursday's message was pure desperation, her voice breaking. Your father's company is suffering because of this. Whatever anger you have toward us, don't punish the innocent people who work there. They don't deserve to lose their jobs because of a family disagreement. Please, we can fix this if you'll just talk to us. I listened to each voicemail once, then archived them without responding. Each call revealed what I'd always known, but they'd refused to acknowledge Eleanor had dismissed me for a decade because she believed I was unsuccessful and bitter, someone who could be safely ignored without consequence. Now the power dynamic had reversed completely, and she had no leverage, no relationship to appeal to, no goodwill to draw on, no way to reach the daughter she'd systematically pushed away. For 10 years, they'd acted as if I didn't matter. Now they were learning exactly how much I did. Friday afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door with an unusual expression, something between concern and anticipation. April, our legal team just sent something to the Wallace home. I thought you should know before your family calls. What did they send? A formal notice requesting an emergency board meeting for Wallace Manufacturing. The agenda item is listed as leadership transition discussion. She paused. It's your legal right as majority stakeholder, but given the timing, it will look like retaliation, I finished. Will it be? I thought about that question watching the Chicago skyline through my office windows. No, I said finally. It will be business. The company needs stable leadership, and the current situation isn't sustainable. The employees deserve better than being collateral damage in a family scandal. My assistant nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. My phone rang 30 seconds later. My father's office line. I let it go to voicemail just like all the others. They were finally ready to talk to me, to acknowledge me, to treat me like someone who mattered. But only because they had to. Only because I held all the power now. And that I realized told me everything I needed to know about what our relationship had always been. The following week, I was in a board meeting reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant slipped a note across the table. Major development, Sophie situation, check news when you can. I nodded slightly and continued the meeting, maintaining the discipline that had built my career. Whatever was happening could wait until we'd finished analyzing the third quarter outlook for our manufacturing portfolio. An hour later, alone in my office, I pulled up the news alerts my assistant had flagged. The headline made me set down my coffee carefully. Influencer Sophie Wallace's Harvard claims unravel under investigation. The article detailed what investigative journalists had uncovered while digging deeper into Sophie's background. For years, she'd claimed in interviews, blog posts, and brand partnership materials that she'd also received a Harvard scholarship but had chosen a different path to help the family business during a difficult time. It was a story that made her seem noble, sacrificial, someone who'd turned down prestige for family loyalty. Her followers had loved it. Brands had found it compelling when evaluating her authenticity. Except Harvard's scholarship office had no record of Sophie Wallace ever receiving any award recognition or admission offer. When reporters contacted the university directly, a spokesperson confirmed, "We have no record of Sophie Marie Wallace in our scholarship databases for any year she would have been eligible." Former classmates from State University were coming forward now, their stories filling in the truth. "Sophie went to State with the rest of us," one woman told a reporter. "She graduated with a 3.2 GPA. There's nothing wrong with that, it's a good school, and she did fine. But around 2015, she started telling people she'd turned down Harvard. Those of us who actually knew her were confused, but nobody wanted to call her out publicly." Another classmate was more direct. She rewrote her entire history. Suddenly, her normal college experience became this tale of sacrifice and noble choices. It was all fabricated. I scrolled through Sophie's old posts, seeing them now through the lens of exposed deception. A 2016 blog entry. "When I chose family over Harvard, people thought I was crazy. But success isn't about prestigious degrees, it's about character." A 2018 Instagram caption alongside a photo of her in business attire: "Harvard wanted me. I wanted purpose. No regrets." A 2020 speaking engagement bio sent to event organizers: Harvard scholarship recipient, listed prominently under credentials. The influencer brand she'd built was constructed on a foundation of fabricated achievements. It wasn't illegal; she hadn't forged documents or stolen money. But it was fundamentally deceptive, and in an industry built entirely on perceived authenticity, deception was death. By midweek, the situation had escalated. 3 companies that had paid Sophie substantial sums for endorsements were filing complaints with consumer protection agencies. A cosmetics brand argued they'd selected her specifically because of her Harvard background and academic excellence narrative. A luxury lifestyle brand claimed her misrepresented credentials made their entire partnership fraudulent. A women's business conference demanded a refund for her speaking fee, stating she'd been hired under false pretenses. Legal experts appeared on morning shows to analyze the situation. A consumer protection attorney explained, "This is what we call reputational fraud, using false credentials to gain commercial advantage. While it's rarely prosecuted criminally, it absolutely voids contracts and opens her up to civil liability." These brands paid premium rates for someone they thought had certain qualifications. If those qualifications were fabricated, they have grounds for legal action. Sunny. Sophie released a statement through her publicist, and I read it with the same analytical detachment I'd applied to every contract I'd ever reviewed. "I never meant to mislead anyone. I was always proud of my sister's achievements, and sometimes, in trying to live up to her example, I may have exaggerated my own background. I deeply apologize to anyone who feels misled by my storytelling." The apology was a masterclass in deflection, and the public saw through it immediately. Comments flooded social media. "She's blaming her sister again." "She didn't exaggerate, she lied for profit." "Notice how she still makes herself the victim." What struck me most as I watched Sophie's world crumble was how little I'd done to cause it. I hadn't leaked information about her fake credentials. I hadn't hired investigators to expose her lies. I hadn't orchestrated any of this. The viral video had created public interest. Real journalists had done their jobs, and Sophie's carefully constructed facade had collapsed under basic fact-checking that apparently no one had bothered to do for years. I'd remained completely silent throughout. No statements, no interviews, no social media posts, defending myself or attacking my family. I'd simply continued living my life, going to work, managing my company, existing authentically, while they imploded from their own deception. My business partner stopped by my office that afternoon with an observation. "You know what's interesting? You're winning this without doing anything. Every day you stay silent, you look more powerful. Every time they scramble or defend themselves, they look weaker." "I'm not trying to win," I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Maybe not consciously, but there's something almost poetic about it. You built a real empire while she built an empire of lies. And when the light finally hit both of you, only one could stand the exposure. That evening, scrolling through news alerts before bed, I saw a new hashtag trending: classy revenge. Women were posting about how April Wallace had achieved the ultimate vindication, not through retaliation or public attacks, but simply by being herself, while her family's lies fell apart around them. She didn't need to destroy them, one viral tweet read. She just needed to exist authentically, and their house of cards collapsed on its own. I wasn't sure how I felt about being called an icon of classy revenge. I hadn't set out to be inspirational or symbolic. I just refused to participate in their fiction any longer, and apparently that was enough. My assistant's final email of the day contained a single line from a breaking news alert. Sources close to the Carrington family say Sophie Wallace's marriage may not survive the month. Harrison's family deeply concerned about ongoing reputational damage. I closed my laptop and walked to my apartment windows, looking out at Chicago's lights. Somewhere 6 hours away, my sister's perfect life was disintegrating. Her influencer empire was ruined. Her credibility was destroyed. Her marriage was falling apart. And I'd done nothing except refuse to pretend anymore. The truth had been enough. Sometimes I was learning the most powerful revenge was simply standing in your truth and watching lies burn themselves down. After 2 weeks of declining every interview request, I finally agreed to speak with one journalist. Her name was Catherine Reeves, a writer for a major national magazine known for thoughtful profiles of women in business. She'd sent a personal letter rather than an email blast explaining that she wanted to write a piece called "The Woman Who Rose in Silence," that would focus not on the scandal, but on my career, my approach to leadership, and what it meant to build power without seeking recognition. Something about her approach felt different from the feeding frenzy of reporters who wanted sound bites about family drama. So I agreed with conditions: one conversation, no cameras, a neutral location of my choosing, and editorial approval of any quotes used. She accepted immediately. We met at a private club in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where serious business happened in quiet corners and discretion was guaranteed. Catherine arrived precisely on time, carrying only a leather notebook and a small recording device which she placed on the table between us after asking permission. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I know you've turned down everyone else. Your letter was different. You weren't asking about the wedding. You were asking about the work." She smiled. "The work is what interests me most. You've built something remarkable while staying completely out of the spotlight. That's rare, especially now when everyone seems desperate for attention." For the next hour, we talked about private equity, about the value of discretion in finance, about what it meant to be a woman in a field still dominated by men who often underestimated me until I'd already outmaneuvered them. Catherine asked intelligent questions about deal structure and risk assessment, about how I identified companies worth saving versus those better left to fail. She understood the industry in a way most journalists didn't. Then she shifted direction. "I have to ask about the wedding, not for drama, but because it's become this cultural moment. When you sat down next to that folding chair, did you know what would happen?" "No. I thought I'd sit quietly, leave quietly, and never speak to them again." "Did it hurt?" I paused, considering the question honestly. "It freed me," I said finally. For 10 years, I told myself their opinion didn't matter. But some part of me kept hoping they'd see me, acknowledge me, recognize what I'd accomplished. The folding chair made it impossible to lie to myself anymore. They'd made their choice clear. So I made mine. Catherine nodded, making notes. The conversation flowed naturally for another 20 minutes, and I was beginning to think we'd covered everything when she asked, almost casually, "I was reviewing your background and found records of a Harvard scholarship in your name from 2005. Why didn't you attend?" The question landed like a physical blow, even though I should have expected it. This wound, this particular failure, was the one I rarely discussed. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I was accepted with a full scholarship, tuition, everything academic completely covered. I was 18, thrilled, ready to start this incredible new chapter. I could still remember that acceptance letter, the weight of it in my hands, the way my mother had cried with joy, and my father had actually hugged me. But that summer, my father's first business venture failed catastrophically. He'd taken out a loan using my college fund as collateral without telling me. When the business collapsed, the fund disappeared with it. Catherine's pen had stopped moving. "He used your college money without permission. The scholarship covered tuition, but I still needed money for housing, books, meal plans, transportation, everything else that makes college possible. I had nothing. I tried to defer enrollment planning to work for a year and save money, but Harvard has very strict policies about scholarship activation. I lost the spot. That must have been devastating. It taught me to rely only on myself, to never assume anyone else would protect my future, even family, especially family." Catherine hesitated before asking her next question. "Did Sophie know about this? About you losing Harvard?" The silence stretched between us. I looked out the window at Chicago's skyline, considering how much truth to give this woman who'd been fair with me so far. She was 15, I said finally. But yes, she knew. Everyone knew. It was our family's worst financial crisis until the one I recently saved them from. The irony isn't lost on me. Your sister has claimed in various interviews and posts that she also received scholarship opportunities from prestigious schools. Given what you've told me about your family dynamics, do you have any thoughts on those claims? I chose my words carefully. My sister has always wanted what I had. Not because she necessarily wanted those specific things, but because she needed to prove she was better than me, more successful, more accomplished. If I succeeded at something, she needed to succeed at it too, or at least appear to. It's been the pattern our entire lives. Catherine was watching me closely now, her journalist instincts clearly activated. So when Sophie claims Harvard connections, I'm not going to speculate about my sister's claims, I interrupted gently. I've told you my truth. What Sophie chose to do with similar narratives is her story to tell, not mine. We wrapped up the interview shortly after Catherine thanking me for my honesty and promising to send me the draft for approval before publication. As we stood to leave, she paused. One more thing. When did Sophie start claiming these Harvard connections? Do you remember? I stopped following my sister's career years ago. You'd have to ask her directly or check her public posts if you're curious. But as I walked back to my office, I knew Catherine would do exactly that. I'd given her enough threads to pull enough context to understand what she might find. And part of me, the part that was tired of silence, tired of protecting people who'd never protected me, wanted her to find it. That evening, Catherine sent me a brief email. Thank you again for your time. I'm doing some additional background research before drafting the profile. I think there may be more to this story than either of us initially realized. I didn't respond, but I imagined her at her computer scrolling back through years of Sophie's carefully curated posts, looking for the moment when my sister's narrative shifted from reality to fiction. And then I imagined her finding it Sophie's earliest influencer posts from 2015, right after she'd launched her personal brand, grateful for opportunities like Harvard that shaped who I am, blessed, scholarship girl. The truth was they're waiting to be uncovered. I'd simply told my story honestly and let the pattern speak for itself. Catherine's article published 3 days later, and she sent me an advance copy at 6 a.m. with a simple message. I'm sorry this will hurt, but it needs to be told. The full piece goes live at 9. I made coffee and sat at my desk as dawn broke over Chicago, reading the headline with a strange sense of detachment, The Folding Chair's Shadow, How Influencer Sophie Wallace Built Success on Her Sister's Stolen Credentials. What Catherine had uncovered was meticulous damning and worse than I'd imagined. She'd compiled a decade of evidence arranging Sophie's deception in chronological order that made the pattern impossible to deny. The earliest reference was Sophie's first major blog post from January 2015, right as she was launching her personal brand. My Harvard scholarship experience taught me that opportunities mean nothing without character. I'm grateful for the foundation elite education provided, even if I chose a different path. The post included photos of Harvard's campus, the iconic gates, the library students walking through the yard. Catherine had verified that these were from a standard campus tour, the kind prospective students and tourists took every day. There was nothing connecting Sophie to the university except proximity and a camera. By 2016, the claims had evolved. Catherine found an interview Sophie gave to a lifestyle blog where she discussed her decision-making process. Turning down Harvard to help my family business during a difficult time, some sacrifices define you more than achievements. I learned that success isn't about prestigious degrees, it's about character and commitment. A 2018 speaking engagement biography listed under credentials Harvard Scholarship recipient, alongside her follower count and brand partnerships. The document was part of a package Sophie's agent sent to event organizers, selling her as someone whose academic excellence matched her social media success. Catherine had obtained brand partnership contracts from 2019 through 2024, and she'd highlighted the relevant sections in her article. A cosmetics company's contract specifically mentioned Sophie Wallace's prestigious academic background and scholarship achievements as factors in their decision to partner with her. A luxury hotel chain's agreement cited her Harvard credentials as evidence of the sophistication their brand required. These weren't casual mentions, they were selling points worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Harvard's registrar's office had confirmed again for Catherine what they'd told other journalists. Sophie Wallace had no record with the university. No application, no acceptance, no scholarship, no attendance. The only Wallace in their scholarship database for 2005 was April Marie Wallace, who'd been awarded a full academic scholarship, but never enrolled. Catherine had found more. Screenshots of Sophie's Harvard visit photos run through reverse image searches showed they matched tourist blog posts from various years. Academic honors Sophie claimed on her LinkedIn profile traced back to generic stock certificates with her name poorly edited in. A 2017 video where Sophie gave advice to scholarship winners was filled with vague platitudes: stay true to yourself, work hard, believe in your dreams, because she'd never actually lived the experience she was claiming to advise on. But the most devastating evidence was a deleted post from 2014 recovered through internet archives. Sophie had written, apparently in a moment of carelessness or genuine belief, "My sister let an amazing opportunity slip away because she wasn't prepared. I'd never be so careless with something so important. Success goes to those who are ready for it." Catherine's analysis was surgical. Sophie Wallace didn't just claim her sister's achievement. She blamed April for losing it, setting up a narrative where Sophie herself would never waste such an opportunity, then spent the next decade pretending she'd been given the same chance and made better choices. The cruelty wasn't thoughtless. It was calculated, systematic, and sustained over 10 years. The article went live at 9 a.m., and within an hour, Sophie was trending on every social media platform. But the hashtags weren't celebratory, they were condemnations. Stolen success, fake brand, credential theft. The comments on Sophie's Instagram, which she hadn't deleted or made private despite everything, were brutal in their betrayal. "We supported you based on lies. You didn't just exaggerate, you stole your sister's life. How do you sleep at night knowing you built everything on fraud? Brand partnerships that had survived the folding chair scandal couldn't survive documented fraud." By noon, 4 companies had issued termination notices. By 3 p.m., Sophie's agent had released a statement saying they'd ended their professional relationship. By evening, Harrison's family, the Carringtons, with their old money and obsessive protection of reputation, released a statement through their lawyers. "We were misled about Sophie Wallace's background and credentials. The family is evaluating all options regarding this matter." Even I, who'd expected some fallout from my interview, hadn't anticipated this level of complete annihilation. Sophie's empire wasn't cracking or crumbling. It was shattering into dust, disintegrating so thoroughly that nothing remained except the truth she'd tried to bury. My assistant knocked on my office door around 4 p.m. "April, are you okay?" I read the article. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." I realized my face was wet. I touched my cheek, surprised to find tears I hadn't noticed falling. But they weren't tears of sadness or even anger. They were something else entirely, relief maybe, or the release of a pressure I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. "It's just..." I started, then stopped, trying to find words for what I was feeling. For 20 years I've known what happened. I knew she took my story. I knew she wore my achievement like a costume. But I never said anything because who would believe me? She was the successful one, the visible one, the one everyone loved, and I was just bitter, unsuccessful. April, who couldn't be happy for her sister. And now everyone knows the truth. Now everyone knows the truth. I repeated, letting those words settle. I didn't leak this. I didn't orchestrate it. I just told my story honestly to one journalist, and she did what journalists are supposed to do. She investigated. And the truth was there all along, waiting to be seen. I wiped my eyes and looked at the article again at the meticulous documentation of my sister's decade-long theft of my singular achievement. She hadn't just borrowed my story or exaggerated her own. She'd taken the most painful moment of my life, losing Harvard, because my father gambled away my future and transformed it into her personal mythology of sacrifice and noble choices. She'd stolen my past and sold it as her present. And now, finally, after 20 years of silence, the truth was louder than any lie she'd ever told. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "April, it's Sophie. Please, we need to talk." I read it once, then set my phone face down on my desk. There was nothing left to say. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday, exactly 1 week after Catherine's article had dismantled what remained of Sophie's credibility. I'd flown in the night before staying at the Four Seasons again, rather than anywhere near my family. My lawyer had coordinated everything with Wallace Manufacturing's legal team, ensuring my attendance was properly documented and unquestionable. I arrived at the company headquarters 15 minutes early, parking in a visitor spot, even though, as majority shareholder, I could have used my father's reserved space. The building looked exactly as I remembered from the few times I'd visited as a teenager, a modest, 2-story structure that housed the offices and management for the manufacturing facilities located a mile away. The receptionist recognized me from the news coverage, her eyes widening slightly before she recovered her professional composure. "Ms. Wallace, they're expecting you in the main conference room." I thanked her and walked down the hallway lined with photos of the company's history. My grandfather founding it in 1962, my father taking over in 1995, various milestones and achievements documented in black and white frames. There were no photos of me, of course. I'd never been part of this legacy, at least not visibly. The conference room door was closed. I could hear muffled voices inside, tense and worried. I checked my watch exactly 10 a.m., then opened the door and walked in. The conversation stopped instantly. 8 board members sat around a long mahogany table, financial reports spread before them, expressions ranging from anxiety to exhaustion. And at the head of the table, in the chair he'd occupied for nearly 3 decades, sat my father. He looked older than I remembered, the scandal having carved new lines into his face. His eyes met mine with a mixture of shock and something that might have been hope, as if perhaps I'd come to save him again without requiring acknowledgement. "April," he stammered, half rising from his chair. "This is a closed board meeting. We're dealing with sensitive company matters. Mr. Wallace." My attorney, David Chen, who'd entered behind me, cut him off with professional courtesy. "As of this morning, Crownbridge Holdings controls 60% of company shares, making Ms. Wallace the majority shareholder. She has every right to be here. More than that, she has the right to lead this meeting." The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the wall clock ticking. My father's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror as he understood what was happening. "That's not, we have bylaws, procedures, all of which have been followed to the letter," David said calmly, distributing copies of the legal documentation to each board member. "Ms. Wallace's controlling interest is legitimate and properly filed. The question now is whether we conduct this meeting with her leadership or whether we adjourn and reconvene under proper authority." I hadn't spoken yet. I simply stood at the entrance, my navy suit perfectly tailored, my leather portfolio under one arm, waiting to see if my father would surrender the chair or if he needed to be removed from it. The board members looked between us, their discomfort palpable. Finally, one of the older executives, a man named Thomas who'd worked with my grandfather, spoke quietly. "Richard, she owns the company now. Let her sit." My father stood slowly, mechanically, and stepped aside. I walked to the head of the table, not rushing, not gloating, just moving with the calm authority I'd earned over a decade of making harder decisions than this, and took the seat. My father remained standing for a moment, as if unsure where he belonged now, before sinking into a chair halfway down the table, no longer at the head, no longer in control. I opened my portfolio and began without preamble. For 3 years, I've kept this company solvent through strategic investment and restructuring. I did it anonymously because I wanted the business to survive on merit, not emotion. That anonymity ends today. I distributed financial reports that David had prepared showing the timeline of my investment through Meridian Capital Trust, the debt restructuring I'd orchestrated, the operational changes I'd implemented through carefully worded recommendations to management. Every decision that had pulled Wallace Manufacturing back from bankruptcy, every strategic move that had stabilized cash flow and restored client confidence bore my fingerprints. The company's survival over the past 3 years wasn't luck or market conditions. I continued meeting each board member's eyes. It was systematic financial intervention funded by Crownbridge Holdings. Every profitable quarter you've celebrated was built on capital and strategy I provided while operating in the shadows. Thomas studied the reports, then looked up at my father with something like pity. "Richard, did you know any of this?" My father's silence was answer enough. I pressed forward. The current crisis: client losses. Reputational damage, banking concerns, stems directly from decisions and dynamics that have nothing to do with the company's operational capacity. We make good products. We employ talented people. What we don't need is leadership that can't separate personal failures from business judgment. My father flinched at that, but I wasn't finished. "I'm not here for revenge or to humiliate anyone further. I'm here because 200 people depend on this company for their livelihoods, and they deserve better than watching it collapse due to scandal. So here are my terms." I looked directly at my father. "You can remain as a consultant with an advisory role, attending meetings and offering your institutional knowledge when requested. Or you can retire with a generous severance package that honors your decades of service. But you will not make operational decisions for this company anymore. I've earned that right not through inheritance or favor, but through results." The room was absolutely still. My father stared at the table, his hands trembling slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "And if I refuse, then I'll vote to remove you from the board entirely, and you'll leave with only what your employment contract guarantees. I don't want to do that. Despite everything, I don't want to destroy you. But I will protect this company and its employees from any further damage." One of the younger board members, a woman named Patricia who'd been hired during my anonymous restructuring, spoke up. "Ms. Wallace, what's your vision for the company moving forward?" I turned to her, grateful for the question that let me shift from confrontation to leadership. "We rebuild our reputation through transparency and excellence. We honor our commitments to clients and employees. We operate with integrity at every level, which means no more secrets, no more dysfunction, no more allowing personal issues to compromise business decisions. This company has good bones. Now it needs leadership that can let it thrive without drama." As I spoke, I saw my father watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, not pride exactly, but something close to recognition. As if he were finally seeing me clearly after decades of looking through me. The daughter he'd dismissed as uncomfortable and difficult was now the powerhouse commanding his boardroom, saving his legacy despite his failures. "All in favor of Ms. Wallace assuming the role of chairman and CEO?" David asked formally. Every hand went up except my father's, which remained in his lap, defeated but not defiant. "Motion carries." David made a note in the meeting minutes. I gathered my materials and stood looking around the table at these people who would now report to me, who would now build this company under my leadership. "From a folding chair to the chairman's seat," I said quietly. "Some journeys take longer, but they're worth the climb." 2 weeks after taking control of Wallace Manufacturing, I was in my Chicago office reviewing quarterly projections when my personal phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. Sophie's number. I stared at it through 3 rings before answering, curiosity overcoming caution. "April." Her voice was raw, broken in a way I'd never heard before. "Please don't hang up. I know I have no right to call, but I'm begging you. I need to see you. It's urgent." I said nothing, waiting to hear what new manipulation she'd crafted. "I'm pregnant." The words came out in a sob. 8 weeks. I just found out last week. In April, everything is falling apart. Harrison barely talks to me anymore. His family is threatening to push for an annulment. My friends won't return my calls. Mom and Dad are too ashamed to even look at me. I have no one, nothing, and I'm terrified. I leaned back in my chair processing this information with the same analytical detachment I'd apply to a business deal. A pregnancy would change everything, not for Sophie and me, but for an innocent child who'd done nothing to deserve being born into this chaos. I know I don't deserve your help. Sophie continued, her voice shaking. I know I've been terrible to you, worse than terrible. But this baby, April, this innocent baby doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. I'm scared. I don't know what I'm going to do. You're the only person I can think of who might... She broke off crying in a way that sounded genuine, which made me trust it even less. Sophie, if you're really pregnant, there are resources. Medical care support programs. I need my sister. Her voice cracked on that last word. I need family. Please, April. Just meet me once. Let me explain everything. For the baby's sake, if not for mine. After we hung up, after I'd promised nothing except that I'd think about it, I sat in my office staring at the Chicago skyline and feeling something I hadn't felt since the wedding uncertainty. For years, I'd built impenetrable walls against my family's manipulation. I'd learned to recognize their patterns, anticipate their moves, protect myself from their casual cruelty. But a pregnancy was different. A child was different. An innocent niece or nephew shouldn't pay for Sophie's sins. My assistant knocked and entered with afternoon coffee, taking one look at my face and asking, "What happened?" My sister called. She says she's pregnant. Oh. Sarah set down the coffee carefully. That's complicated. She wants to meet. She says she needs help, has no one else to turn to. Do you believe her? I thought about that question. I want to. Part of me wants to believe that becoming a mother might change her, humble her, make her see beyond herself. But I've spent 38 years learning that what I want my family to be and what they actually are tend to be very different things. Over the next few days, Sophie's campaign intensified with the precision of someone who understood exactly which emotional buttons to push. She sent a text with an ultrasound image, grainy black and white with the typical measurements and timestamps that made it look legitimate. Your niece or nephew, the caption read. Due in February. I'm sorry for everything, April. I just want to do right by this baby. She asked to meet for coffee, nothing formal, just a conversation between sisters about the future. Her messages were humble, apologetic, focused entirely on the baby rather than herself. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I recognized it even as I felt myself softening despite my better judgment. Then Sophie posted something on Instagram, her first post since the scandal broke. It was vague, carefully worded, accompanied by a photo of a sunset. In difficult times, we learn who truly matters. Family, new beginnings, hope. The comments were more sympathetic than her recent posts had been, her followers apparently interpreting this as genuine reflection rather than strategic image rehabilitation. My business partner stopped by my office on Friday afternoon, ostensibly to discuss a potential acquisition, but really to check on me. You've been distracted all week. This isn't like you. My sister claims she's pregnant. She's asking for help. He nodded slowly. And you're trying to decide if you can trust her. I'm trying to decide if I can live with myself if I don't help, and there really is a baby. If Sophie's lying, I lose nothing by verifying. If she's telling the truth and I turn my back on a pregnant woman, even her, what does that make me? It makes you someone with boundaries. But I understand the dilemma. He paused, choosing his words carefully. In business, when something seems too perfectly timed to be coincidental, what do? I verify independently before committing resources. Exactly. That conversation crystallized what I'd been avoiding acknowledging. My instincts, the same instincts that had built an $800 million company by identifying truth from fiction in financial statements, were screaming that something about Sophie's timing felt calculated. She'd lost everything, faced complete social and professional ruin, and suddenly she was pregnant at exactly the moment when a pregnancy would give her leverage over me, sympathy from the public, and pressure on Harrison to stay. It was too convenient, too perfectly designed to appeal to my sense of justice while giving her exactly what she needed to rebuild her image and secure her marriage. That evening, I called my assistant. "Sarah, I need you to do something, and I need complete discretion." "Of course." "Find me the best private investigator in the city. Someone who specializes in domestic cases, verification of claims, that sort of thing. I need them to look into my sister's situation." There was a pause before Sarah responded, her voice careful. "You want to verify the pregnancy." "I want to verify everything. Medical appointments, doctor visits, any evidence that supports or contradicts her claim. I need to know if this is real before I commit to helping. I'll have someone for you by morning." And Sarah, schedule a meeting with Sophie for next week. Neutral location. Tell her I'm willing to talk, but I need a few days to process everything first. After she hung up, I sat alone in my office thinking about trust and family and the difference between being cruel and being careful. If Sophie was really pregnant, if she really needed help, a few days of verification wouldn't harm her or the baby. But if she was lying, if this was another manipulation, another attempt to use my compassion against me, then I needed to know before I opened myself up to being hurt again. I'd learned the hard way that wanting to believe someone and actually being able to trust them were two entirely different things. And this time, before I let hope override judgment, I would verify every single detail of my sister's desperate story. The private investigator's report arrived on Wednesday morning, delivered in person to my office in a sealed envelope. Marcus Webb was exactly the kind of professional I'd hoped for, thorough, discreet, and completely unsentimental about his findings. He sat across from my desk while I read, available for questions, but not offering commentary until I'd absorbed everything. The first section documented Sophie's medical history over the past 3 months. No visits to any OB/GYN in the area. No pregnancy-related appointments, no prenatal vitamins prescribed, no blood work ordered. Her primary care physician hadn't seen her since a routine physical 8 months ago. The ultrasound images she'd sent me matched stock photographs available on multiple medical information websites, down to the pixel dimensions and timestamps that Sophie had failed to alter. The surveillance section was more damning. Marcus had followed Sophie for 5 days, documenting her activities with time-stamped photographs and video. Tuesday evening, Sophie at an upscale wine bar drinking red wine and laughing with a woman Marcus identified as a former influencer colleague. Thursday afternoon, Sophie at a hot yoga class, her clothing revealing no physical signs of pregnancy. Friday morning, Sophie meeting with someone Marcus had identified as an acting coach, their conversation captured on video where Sophie asked about portraying authentic vulnerability and making emotional appeals believable. The final section detailed Sophie's internet search history, legally obtained through her publicly accessible social media activity and cross-referenced with timing. 3 weeks ago, she'd researched how to fake pregnancy symptoms, early pregnancy signs, and convincing someone you're pregnant. She'd visited forums where people discussed elaborate deceptions. She'd downloaded apps that generated fake ultrasound images. This wasn't a moment of desperate dishonesty. It was premeditated fraud, carefully researched and methodically executed. Marcus spoke quietly. "She's desperate, Ms. Wallace. But she's not honest. Everything about this pregnancy claim was calculated deception designed to exploit your compassion. I'm sorry." After he left, I sat alone in my office as evening fell over Chicago, reading the report again with tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying for Sophie, or even for the relationship we'd never had. I was crying from exhaustion, from years of hoping, years of trying to see the best in people who showed me their worst years of believing that family meant something more than shared DNA and mutual disappointment. I grieved for the sister I'd wanted Sophie to be, the one who might have celebrated my successes instead of stealing them, the one who might have called just to talk, not just to manipulate, the one who might have grown and changed and learned that cruelty had consequences. But that sister didn't exist. Maybe she never had. What made this betrayal particularly cruel was its target. Sophie hadn't just lied about being pregnant, she'd weaponized motherhood itself using the idea of an innocent child as leverage against me. She'd exploited my sense of justice, my belief that children shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes. And in doing so, she'd shown contempt not just for me, but for every woman who'd genuinely struggled with fertility, every mother who'd faced pregnancy with real fear and hope, every child born into complicated circumstances. Sophie had thought hitting rock bottom would humble her. Instead, she'd found a way to sink lower. I called her Thursday afternoon. "I'll meet you tomorrow. That cafe on Market Street, 10 a.m. Her voice flooded with relief. "Thank you, April. Thank you so much. I promise you won't regret this. I just want to talk sister to sister about the future, and tomorrow, Sophie, 10 a.m. I arrived early, taking a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Sophie walked in exactly on time, and I had to admire the performance. She wore loose, flowing clothing that suggested she was hiding a pregnancy. Her makeup was minimal, designed to look like someone too overwhelmed to care about appearances. Her expression was carefully crafted, vulnerable, hopeful, desperate in a way that would appeal to sympathy. She sat down, reaching for my hand across the table. "April, I'm so grateful you agreed to see me. I know things have been terrible between us, but family is family, and with the baby coming, you're not pregnant." The words landed like stones in still water. Sophie's face went completely blank for a fraction of a second before she recovered, forcing confusion into her expression. "What, April? Of course I am. I sent you the ultrasound. I'm 8 weeks. The ultrasound is a stock image from a medical website. You haven't seen a doctor in 8 months. You were drinking wine on Tuesday and doing hot yoga on Thursday." I slid the investigator's report across the table. "You researched how to fake pregnancy symptoms 3 weeks ago. You hired an acting coach to help you portray authentic vulnerability. There is no baby Sophie. There never was." She stared at the report, her hands trembling. I watched her try different responses, her face cycling through options like an actress considering which role to play. Denial first. "This is insane. How dare you have me followed? How dare you invade my privacy? I verified your claim before committing resources. That's not invasion, that's due diligence." Then defensiveness. "You don't understand what it's like. I've lost everything. I needed help, and you're the only person who you could manipulate, who you thought you could exploit one more time." Finally, she collapsed forward, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice broke, and these tears looked real, though I no longer trusted myself to distinguish Sophie's genuine emotions from her performances. "I've lost everything, April. Everything. My career, my marriage, my friends, my reputation. I'm completely alone, and I'm terrified. I thought if you believed I was vulnerable enough, if there was an innocent baby involved, you'd help me. I'm desperate." I stood up, gathering my coat and bag. "Then learn what rock bottom really means." "April, please. You're not at rock bottom yet, Sophie. You're still lying. You're still manipulating. You're still trying to use other people's compassion as a weapon against them." I looked at my sister, really looked at her maybe for the last time, and felt nothing but tired sadness. Rock bottom is when you finally tell the truth, when you stop performing and start being honest, first with yourself and then with everyone you've hurt. You're not there yet. What am I supposed to do? That's not my problem to solve. I can't save you from yourself, and I won't enable you anymore. You need to face what you've done, who you've become, and decide if you want to be someone different. But you have to want it for yourself, not because it's another strategy to get something from me. I walked toward the cafe door, my heels clicking on the tile floor. Behind me, Sophie called out one more time, her voice breaking. "You're really going to leave me like this? You're just going to walk away?" I stopped at the door, not turning around. "I'm going to let you save yourself, or not. That's your choice now." Outside, the autumn air was cold and clean. I walked to my car, got inside, and sat for a long moment before starting the engine. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Please don't do this." I deleted it without responding. Through the cafe window, I could see Sophie still sitting at our table, alone, her head in her hands. She looked up once our eyes meeting across the distance, and I saw something in her expression that might have been the first genuine emotion she'd shown me in years. Fear. Real, unperformed, desperate fear of facing herself without anyone left to blame or manipulate or hide behind. I started my car and drove away, knowing I'd just made the hardest decision of my life, not to rescue someone who refused to be honest, not to enable someone who viewed every relationship as a transaction, not to sacrifice my own peace for someone who'd never valued it. Sophie whispered to herself in that empty cafe, words I couldn't hear but could imagine. "She's really going to let me drown." But she was wrong. I wasn't letting her drown. I was finally letting her learn to swim. 6 months passed in silence. I learned about Sophie's life not through direct contact, but through fragments my mother's occasional emails that I read, but didn't respond to news items that my assistant flagged the absence of Sophie's presence on social media, where she'd once been inescapable. Harrison's family had moved swiftly, their lawyers securing an annulment based on fraud in the inducement. The legal argument was elegant in its brutality. Sophie had misrepresented her educational background, her credentials, her entire foundation, making the marriage contract voidable from inception. It was finalized within 3 months, and Harrison married someone else within 6. Old money moved on quickly when reputation was at stake. Sophie moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood far from the estate she'd grown up in, far from the luxury she'd once displayed so prominently. According to my mother's emails, which grew increasingly desperate as her daughters remained estranged, Sophie was working retail at a department store. "She's a sales associate, April. Can you imagine after everything she built?" My mother's horror at this downward mobility would have been amusing if it wasn't so revealing about what she valued. I didn't respond to those emails, but I didn't delete them either. They sat in a folder I rarely opened, a record of a family I was learning to release. Meanwhile, I was building something that mattered. The Seat at the Table initiative launched 4 months after I took control of Wallace Manufacturing, funded initially by Crownbridge Holdings, but growing through corporate partnerships and individual donations. The mission was specific scholarships for women who'd lost educational opportunities due to family financial crises. We covered everything: tuition, housing, books, living expenses, even emergency funds for unexpected costs. No brilliant woman would lose her chance the way I had, not if I could prevent it. The first year we awarded scholarships to 35 women. Their stories were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure: daughters whose college funds had disappeared in divorces, women whose families had chosen to fund brothers' educations. Instead, brilliant students who'd had to choose between caring for sick parents and attending university. Each one reminded me of my 18-year-old self, holding that Harvard acceptance letter while watching my future dissolve. I started speaking at women's business conferences, something I'd avoided for years because I preferred the shadows. But the initiative needed visibility, needed advocates, needed women to know that losing one opportunity didn't mean losing all of them. My speeches focused on resilience, on building success without seeking validation, on the power of silent achievement. I never mentioned my family directly, though. Everyone in the audience knew the story. I'd moved beyond them, or at least I was trying to. My company flourished under my leadership. Wallace Manufacturing's reputation recovered as we demonstrated consistent quality and ethical operations. Crownbridge Holdings expanded into new sectors, and my personal net worth climbed past $150 million. I bought a larger penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan. I hired a housekeeper, not because I needed one, but because I could finally admit that success meant being able to delegate the tasks that drained me. Yet my assistant noticed something I thought I'd hidden well. She came into my office one afternoon and saw the photograph on my bookshelf, the only personal item in a space otherwise devoted to work. It was old, maybe 25 years, showing 2 little girls in matching summer dresses, arms around each other, laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. Sophie was maybe 6. I was 9, and we looked inseparable. "Is that your sister?" Sarah asked carefully. "It was, a long time ago." "Do you miss her?" I thought about that question for a long time. "I miss who I wished she was. I don't miss who she actually is. There's a difference." Sarah nodded understanding in a way that suggested she'd made similar peace with difficult family members. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Letting go of the fantasy." "The fantasy was easier," I admitted. "It required less acceptance, less grief." My mother's letters came monthly handwritten on her monogrammed stationery, each one a variation on the same theme. The family was broken. I was the only one who could fix it. Couldn't. I find it in my heart to forgive, to reach out to bridge the gap that Sophie's mistakes had created. I read them once and filed them away, not answering but not discarding. Some part of me couldn't quite throw them away, though I couldn't articulate why. My father sent one letter 6 months after I'd taken control of his company. It was brief-typed rather than handwritten, formal in its contrition. "I was wrong about everything. I judged you unfairly, dismissed your achievements, failed to see who you really were. I'm sorry." I read it twice, looking for manipulation or justification, and finding only exhaustion. I filed it with my mother's letters, acknowledging the apology internally, even if I couldn't respond to it yet. But Sophie sent nothing. No letters, no calls, no attempts at contact. For months, there was only silence from the sister who'd once called weekly to boast about her latest brand partnership or viral post. This absence felt different from the others, not hostile or manipulative, but something else. Necessary, maybe. Honest in its own way. She wasn't apologizing because she'd finally understood that apologies without change were just more performance. She wasn't reaching out because she'd learned that I wouldn't be manipulated again. She'd simply disappeared from my life as thoroughly as I'd once been erased from hers, and somehow this felt like the first genuine thing she'd done in years. I found myself thinking about her sometimes, usually late at night when work couldn't distract me from quieter thoughts. I wondered if she was okay, if she was learning anything from her fall, if rock bottom was teaching her what success never had. But I didn't reach out. The silence between us was a boundary. We both needed space for potential growth that contact would only contaminate. My business partner asked me once during a late dinner after closing a major deal, "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them?" I don't know. Maybe, but it would have to be different. Built on truth instead of performance, on respect instead of obligation. I paused, considering. Right now, the silence feels like the most honest conversation we've ever had. On the anniversary of the folding chair incident, exactly 1 year after Sophie had given me that metal chair, and I'd walked out of her wedding, a package arrived at my office. No return address, just my name and the office location in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. My assistant brought it in, and we both stared at it suspiciously before I carefully opened it. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a small wooden chair. Hand-carved, the wood sanded smooth, the joints fitted with obvious care. It was simple, functional, beautiful in its honesty. No gold monograms, no designer flourishes, just solid craftsmanship that suggested hours of patient work. A note was tucked underneath, written on plain white paper in Sophie's handwriting. "I'm building my own seat now. S." I held that wooden chair in my hands, feeling its weight, its solidity, the evidence of effort and time. My assistant watched me carefully. "Is that from your sister?" I nodded, unable to speak past the unexpected tightness in my throat. "What does it mean?" I set the chair gently on my desk, studying the grain of the wood, the careful joints, the hours of work it represented. "I think," I said slowly, "it means she's finally learning what I tried to teach her. That dignity isn't performed or stolen, it's built." I kept Sophie's carved wooden chair on my desk for months, a reminder that change might be possible even when it seemed unlikely. I didn't hear from her directly. She respected the boundary I'd set, which was itself a form of communication. but I began to notice small signs that something in her life had shifted fragments of information that reached me through unexpected channels. The first came from my fund administrator during a quarterly review meeting. Jennifer was walking me through donation analytics when she mentioned something in passing. "We have one donor who gives $25 every month like clockwork. Same day each month, always anonymous. It's not a large amount, but the consistency is remarkable. In 2 years of running this fund, I've never seen that kind of dedication from someone giving so little." Something about that detail caught in my chest. $25 from someone who once spent thousands on a single designer handbag. Someone who'd built an empire on appearances, but was now giving quietly, consistently, without recognition or reward. "Can you trace the donor?" I asked. Jennifer shook her head. "Anonymous means anonymous. They use a service that protects donor identity. All we know is they've never missed a month." I thought about that unnamed donor often over the following weeks, wondering if my instinct was correct or if I was projecting hope onto coincidence. Either way, someone was giving what they could afford month after month, supporting work that helped women rebuild after loss. The humility of that gesture moved me more than any grand apology could have. The second sign came at our annual scholarship ceremony, an event I'd grown to love despite my discomfort with public speaking. We gathered in a hotel ballroom, nothing as grand as the Grand Meridian, but respectable and warm, to celebrate the 50 women receiving scholarships that year. I stood at the podium sharing stories of resilience and second chances, looking out at faces that reflected determination and hope and the kind of strength that comes from surviving disappointment. I didn't see Sophie in the audience that night. She sat in the very back row, partially hidden behind a column, wearing simple clothes and no makeup that would draw attention. I only learned she'd been there weeks later when one of our volunteers mentioned seeing someone who looked familiar, leaving quickly after my speech before the reception began. "She didn't try to talk to anyone," the volunteer said. "She just sat in the back and watched. I thought it was odd she seemed really moved by your speech, but she left before you could see her." The image stayed with me, Sophie sitting alone in the shadows, watching me inspire women to rebuild their lives, not trying to be seen or acknowledged or forgiven. Just witnessing, privately grieving perhaps for the relationship we'd never had and might never have. The third sign came in the form of an article that landed on my desk one Tuesday morning. My assistant brought it in with an unusual expression somewhere between surprise and hope. "You should read this. It's about someone who rebuilt after public scandal. The journalist sent it specifically to you with a note." The article was titled, "From Influencer to Invisible One Woman's Journey, From Performance to Purpose." It profiled a woman named Sarah who'd lost everything after building success on fabricated credentials, then found authentic meaning in service work at a women's shelter. The writing was compassionate but honest, detailing how this woman, unnamed for most of the article, had spent 18 months volunteering 3 nights a week helping women escape abusive situations, find resources, housing, and dignity. Her supervisor at the shelter was quoted, "Sarah has a gift for helping women see their own strength. She listens without judgment and helps them navigate systems that can be overwhelming. She's one of our most dedicated volunteers." When I suggested she consider social work as a profession, she enrolled in community college night classes. "She's pursuing a degree in social services, genuinely pursuing education this time," she said, and I didn't understand what she meant until later. I was reading the shelter supervisor's quote when the article revealed what I'd already begun to suspect. The journalist had recognized her subject midway through the interview. "You're Sophie Wallace, aren't you? The woman from the folding chair wedding?" The article described Sophie's response, going pale, considering denial, then nodding with resignation. But instead of the defensiveness the journalist expected, Sophie had offered something else entirely. "I destroyed my family for validation I didn't need," Sophie was quoted as saying. "I spent years building an empire on lies because I thought external success would fill something broken inside me. It didn't. It made everything worse. Losing everything was the best thing that could have happened because it forced me to look at who I'd become, and I hated what I saw. Now I'm trying to spend the rest of my life making that right, not publicly, not for redemption or a comeback story, but because it's what I should have done all along. These women at the shelter, they're surviving impossible situations with more courage than I ever had. Helping them helps me remember what actually matters. The journalist had asked if Sophie hoped for reconciliation with her sister. I hope April finds peace, whether that includes me or not. I don't deserve her forgiveness, and I'm not working toward earning it because that would make it transactional again. I'm just trying to become someone worth knowing, even if she never knows me. The article ended with the journalist's observation. What's remarkable about Sophie Wallace's transformation isn't that she's seeking redemption, it's that she's not. She's not crafting a comeback narrative or positioning herself for public forgiveness. She's working a retail job, taking community college classes, and volunteering at a shelter where most people don't know who she is. She's rebuilding not her image, but her character. And she's doing it without an audience, which for someone whose entire identity was once built on being watched, might be the most authentic thing she's ever done. The note from the journalist was clipped to the article, handwritten on simple stationery. Ms. Wallace, I spent 3 hours interviewing your sister for this piece. I went in expecting excuses and performance. What I found was someone genuinely trying to change, not for recognition, but because she finally understands what you tried to teach her. I thought you should know. She asked me not to send this to you for what it's worth. She said she didn't want you to think she was using this as another manipulation. But I think some truths deserve to be witnessed, even if the person changing doesn't seek that witness. She's becoming someone different, April. Slowly, quietly, authentically. I thought you'd want to know that your example inspired something real, even in the person who hurt you most. I read the article 3 times, looking for signs of performance or manipulation, and finding none. The Sophie in these pages sounded exhausted, humble, uncertain. Nothing like the confident influencer who'd humiliated me with a folding chair, and nothing like the desperate woman who'd faked a pregnancy to manipulate my compassion. She sounded like someone who'd finally hit actual rock bottom and was slowly, painfully learning to build something real from the rubble. I set the article down on my desk next to her carved wooden chair. These 2 pieces of evidence that change, while rare and difficult and never guaranteed, was sometimes possible. My assistant knocked softly. What do you think? I looked at the chair Sophie had made with her own hands, at the article describing work she was doing without audience or applause, at the pattern of $25 donations made month after month without recognition. I think, I said slowly, that she might finally understand what I tried to teach her. That dignity isn't performed, it's built, one choice at a time in private when no one's watching. Does that change anything between you? I thought about that question, feeling the complexity of it settle around me. Not yet, maybe never, but it means change is possible, and that's something. 2 weeks after reading the article about Sophie's transformation, a letter arrived at my office. Not an email or text, but an actual letter, cream-colored paper, in a plain envelope addressed in handwriting I recognized despite the years. My assistant brought it in during an afternoon meeting, and I set it aside until I was alone, some instinct telling me this required privacy. The letter was written in Sophie's careful script, each word clearly deliberate, the sentences free of the performative language that had once defined her communication. April, I won't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it yet, maybe ever. I won't ask to see you because respecting your boundaries is the least I can do. I just want you to know I finally understand what you tried to show me at the wedding. Dignity isn't performed, it's lived. You walked away with grace when I had none. I'm trying to learn that now slowly without audience or applause. If you never want to hear from me again, I'll respect that. But I needed you to know you were always the better sister, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. Sophie. I read it 3 times, analyzing each sentence the way I'd analyze a contract looking for manipulation or hidden agendas. But the letter was straightforward, humble, asking for nothing. Sophie wasn't requesting a meeting or response. She was simply stating truth as she now understood it, then leaving the decision entirely to me. I put the letter in my desk drawer without responding, not because I was being cruel, but because trust couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. Words had always been Sophie's specialty, crafting captions, spinning narratives, saying whatever would generate the desired response. If she'd really changed, she would understand that I needed more than beautiful sentences. I needed evidence. Over the next 2 months, I conducted my own investigation, though this time without hiring professionals. I called the women's shelter where Sophie volunteered, identifying myself only as a potential major donor interested in learning about their programs. The director, a woman named Patricia, with a voice that suggested decades of dealing with crisis and compassion, spoke enthusiastically about their volunteers. We have about 30 regular volunteers, but a few stand out. There's one woman, Sarah, who's been with us 6 months now. 3 nights a week, never misses a shift. The residents trust her, which is remarkable because trust is hard-won here. She has this quality of listening without judgment, really hearing what they're saying beneath their words. When I suggested she consider social work professionally, she enrolled in school the next week. That kind of dedication is rare. I thanked Patricia and made a substantial donation, knowing now that Sophie's work at the shelter wasn't performance. You couldn't fake 6 months of consistent volunteer work with women who'd been manipulated and lied to enough to recognize it immediately. I contacted Sophie's community college next, navigating the bureaucracy to verify enrollment without violating privacy laws. A helpful registrar confirmed that Sophie Wallace was enrolled in their social services program, taking 4 classes each semester while maintaining a 3.7 GPA. She's one of our older students, the registrar noted. They tend to take their education more seriously. Is there something specific you needed? No, thank you. That's all I needed to know. Finally, one Saturday morning, I drove to the address listed on Sophie's volunteer forms, a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood 40 minutes from where we'd grown up. No doorman, no luxury amenities, just a 3-story brick building with a small parking lot and laundry hanging from a few balconies. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching residents come and go, confirming that Sophie really lived here, really had traded her aspirational lifestyle for genuine obscurity. Everything I found confirmed what the article had suggested. Sophie wasn't performing rehabilitation. She was living it quietly, without the audience that had once been essential to her identity. 3 months after receiving Sophie's letter, I finally responded, not with a letter or phone call, but with a text message that was deliberately brief and bounded. There's a coffee shop on 5th and Main, Saturday 10 a.m., 1 hour. The reply came within minutes. I'll be there. Thank you. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear, one of those autumn days where everything felt sharp-edged and honest. I arrived at the coffee shop exactly at 10, expecting to find Sophie waiting. She was already there, seated at a corner table, away from the windows, 2 plain coffees in front of her. She'd arrived early, I realized, wanting to be settled and calm when I walked in, not wanting to create drama or tension with a rushed entrance. I studied her as I approached. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, no designer labels visible, no makeup beyond what someone might wear to look presentable rather than beautiful. Her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail. She looked nervous, genuinely, so her hands wrapped around one of the coffee cups, as if needing something to hold. April. She stood halfway as I sat, then seemed uncertain whether that was appropriate and settled back down. Thank you for coming. I got you coffee black the way you used to drink it. I don't know if that's changed. It hasn't. I took the cup, noting that she remembered this detail from years ago before everything broke. The first 10 minutes were excruciating. We made careful small talk. How was the weather? How was the traffic? Nothing of substance. Then Sophie asked about my company, and I gave her a brief update on Wallace Manufacturing's recovery. She asked intelligent questions, listened carefully, didn't try to relate everything back to herself. Your scholarship fund, Sophie said quietly. I read about a woman who lost her chance at medical school because her father took her college fund for a business that failed. The fund covered everything: tuition, living expenses, even her textbooks. She's in her 2nd year now. That's incredible work, April. I studied her face, looking for any sign that she knew she'd just described a version of my own story. If she recognized the parallel, she didn't show it. "What about you?" I asked. "Community college. Social services degree. That's different from influencer marketing." "It's real," Sophie said simply. "That's the difference. I'm learning things that matter, helping people who actually need help, not just selling them products they don't need based on credentials I didn't have." She paused. "I'm not good at it yet. The coursework is hard, and I'm older than most of my classmates. But it feels right in a way nothing else ever has." We talked about her classes, about the women at the shelter, about her retail job that paid barely enough to cover rent and groceries. Sophie didn't complain or ask for anything. She simply described her life with a matter-of-fact honesty that would have been unthinkable from the sister I once knew. As the hour approached its end, I set down my empty cup. "This doesn't fix anything, Sophie." "I know." Her voice was steady, accepting. "I don't expect it to. I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation or anything from you. But thank you for this hour, for letting me show you even in this small way that I'm trying to be different." I stood to leave, gathering my coat and purse. Sophie remained seated, not trying to extend the conversation or extract promises. At the door, I turned back. "Same time next month, if you want." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. "I want. Very much." I walked to my car, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked the door. Once inside, I pulled out my phone and texted my therapist, the woman who'd helped me navigate the past 2 years of family chaos and public scrutiny. "I saw her today. I don't know if I can ever forgive her, but maybe I can learn to let her try." The response came quickly. "That's all forgiveness ever is, letting someone try to earn what they can never truly repay. You're doing the brave thing, April. Trust the process." I drove home through the autumn afternoon, thinking about coffee shops and careful conversations, and the long, uncertain road between estrangement and reconciliation. I didn't know where this path would lead, didn't know if Sophie's transformation would last or crumble under pressure. But for the first time in years, I was willing to find out. While Sophie and I navigated our careful monthly coffee meetings, my father existed in a parallel isolation I only learned about through fragments. My mother had moved to a smaller house across town after I'd exposed her complicity, unable to face Richard's accusations that she'd poisoned his relationship with me through years of manipulation. He lived alone now in the family estate that felt too large for one person, a space designed for celebrations and gatherings that no longer happened. I'd never canceled his healthcare benefits when I took over Wallace Manufacturing, though I could have justified it as a cost-cutting measure. Some vestige of daughterly duty or perhaps simple decency kept me from stripping away his medical coverage even as I stripped away his authority. Because of this, he'd been assigned a therapist through the company's employee assistance program, and apparently he'd been attending sessions. I learned this when his therapist called me with Richard's permission to discuss whether I'd be willing to participate in family therapy. I declined, but the therapist shared one observation that stayed with me. "Your father is finally confronting why he treated you the way he did. It's painful to watch, honestly. He's realizing he punished you for reminding him of his own inadequacy." That conversation happened in February. By March, I received an email from my father with an unusual subject line, "Request for permission to publish." The email was brief and formal, so characteristic of how Richard Wallace had always communicated with me when he communicated at all. Attached was a document and opinion piece he'd written for a major national newspaper. He asked if I would read it and let him know if I objected to him using my story publicly. "I understand if you say no," the email concluded, "but I feel I need to say this even if it destroys what little reputation I have left." I opened the attachment with trepidation and read the headline he'd chosen, "I am the father who gave his daughter a folding chair." What followed was the most honest thing my father had ever written, at least that I'd seen. He confessed everything without softening or justifying. He described taking my college fund to cover his failing business venture, then blaming me for making him feel guilty instead of acknowledging his theft. He admitted dismissing my success because it highlighted his failures I'd rebuilt from nothing, using skills and determination he didn't possess, and rather than feel proud, he'd felt diminished. April reminded me of everything I wasn't, he wrote. She was brilliant where I was merely competent. She was disciplined where I was impulsive. She succeeded through careful planning where I failed through reckless choices. Sophie was easy to love because she made me feel like I'd done something right. Her visible success felt like my success, her social media empire felt like validation of my parenting. The fact that it was built on lies didn't matter to me because I needed to believe I'd raised at least one daughter well. He described the wedding, the folding chair, his complicity in that humiliation. He wrote about learning I'd saved his company anonymously, about the shame of realizing his guardian angel investor was the daughter he'd barely acknowledged. I'm not seeking sympathy or forgiveness, the piece concluded. I'm writing to acknowledge that fathers can destroy daughters through neglect, favoritism, and pride. My daughter April saved my company while I excluded her from my life. My daughter Sophie built lies while I cheered her on. I failed them both, one through cruelty, the other through blindness. If any parent reads this and sees themselves, I beg you stop before it's too late. I can't undo my damage, but maybe I can prevent yours. I read it twice, then sent a brief reply. You have my permission to publish it. The op-ed appeared the following Sunday and went viral within hours. Some readers praised my father's honesty and accountability. Others criticized him for using his daughter's pain for redemption. Think pieces spawned analyzing parental favoritism and financial abuse. My inbox flooded with interview requests asking for my response. I gave none. Instead, I sent my father a private email. This doesn't erase the past, but it's the first honest thing you've said to me in 20 years. If you mean it, prove it through action, not more words. I didn't expect him to take it seriously. Richard Wallace had always been better at grand gestures than sustained effort. But 3 weeks later, Jennifer from my scholarship fund called with an unusual question. April, we have a volunteer who's been helping process applications. He's incredibly dedicated, comes in twice a week, stays for hours, asks thoughtful questions about how we evaluate candidates. He refuses any public acknowledgement and asks that we don't mention his involvement. But I thought you should know it's your father. I was silent for a long moment. What kind of work is he doing? Administrative mostly. Reading applications, helping coordinate events, reaching out to partner universities. He's actually quite good at it. He had one suggestion that improved our review process. She paused. When I asked why he was so committed, he said he was making amends to someone he hurt. I didn't pry, but I assume he meant you. Probably. Should I discourage his involvement? I don't want to create an uncomfortable situation. I thought about that question, weighing my discomfort against the good work he was apparently doing. No, if he's helping women get the opportunities I lost, that's worthwhile, regardless of his motivation. Just don't give him any special treatment or public recognition. Understood. Over the following months, I received periodic reports about my father's volunteer work. He never missed his scheduled shifts. He treated applicants' stories with respect and care. He developed a system for tracking scholarship recipients' progress and ensuring they received continued support. When staff asked about his background in business, he deflected, keeping the focus on the work rather than himself. It was, I had to admit, exactly the kind of sustained, unglamorous effort that I'd asked for. Not grand apologies or public performances, but quiet, consistent action that helped others even when no one was watching. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't thank him or acknowledge his work. But I didn't stop him either, and in its own way, that was a form of communication. I was willing to let him try, even if I wasn't ready to forgive. 6 months after his op-ed published, my phone buzzed with a text from my father's number. I stared at it for a moment before opening it, bracing myself for whatever he might say. I know I can't be your father again, but may I try to be your friend? I set the phone down and looked out my office windows at the Chicago skyline, thinking about fathers and daughters, and the space between forgiveness and rejection where something else might exist. Not the relationship we'd had, which had been broken from the start, but perhaps something new built slowly on honesty and sustained effort rather than obligation and disappointment. I didn't respond immediately. Like Sophie's letter months ago, this required time and thought. But unlike Sophie's letter, which I'd put in a drawer for 3 months, I found myself picking up my phone that same evening. My response was brief, bounded, but not unkind. "Coffee, same place I meet Sophie. First Saturday of next month, 11 a.m. We'll see." His reply came within minutes. "I'll be there. Thank you, April." I sat with my phone in my hand, feeling the weight of tentative reconciliation with two people who'd hurt me deeply, and were now slowly, painfully trying to become people worth knowing. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility. And after everything, that felt like enough to start with. The monthly coffee meetings with Sophie continued through spring and summer, each one slightly less stilted than the last, and my father joined us twice, the three of us navigating conversation like diplomats in a fragile ceasefire. By fall, when planning began for the Seat at the Table Fund's first major gala, I faced a decision I'd been avoiding, whether to invite my family to witness what I'd built from the ashes of their rejection. The gala was scheduled for early November at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the same venue where Sophie's wedding had taken place 2 years earlier. My event coordinator had suggested it for practical reasons, capacity, location, prestige, and I'd agreed partly because the symmetry felt right, and partly because I wanted to prove I could transform a space of humiliation into something meaningful. We were celebrating 2 years of the fund's operation, 150 women who'd received scholarships and millions of dollars raised for women who'd lost educational opportunities through no fault of their own. High-profile donors had confirmed attendance along with several politicians, business leaders, and media figures who'd embraced the fund's mission. I would be the evening's main speaker, sharing the vision and impact of work that had become more important to me than any business deal I'd ever closed. 3 weeks before the event, I sent invitations to Sophie, Richard, and Eleanor. Simple, formal invitations with no personal note, just the standard text about date, time, and dress code. I didn't know if they would come, didn't know if I wanted them to come. But some instinct told me that closure required witnesses to transformation. They needed to see what I'd built, not despite their cruelty, but perhaps because of it, how pain could be transmuted into purpose when you refused to let it destroy you. Sophie responded first. "I'll be there. Thank you for inviting me." Richard next. "I would be honored to attend. Thank you, April." Eleanor last. "I will come if my presence won't cause you discomfort. I understand if you'd prefer I didn't." I replied to all three with the same brief message. "See you there." The night of the gala, I arrived early to review setup and calm my nerves. The ballroom had been transformed with elegant simplicity, no over-the-top florals or excessive decoration, just clean lines, warm lighting, and displays featuring scholarship recipients' stories. The chairs were all the same, upholstered, comfortable, dignified, arranged around tables that seated 8. No folding chairs. No hierarchy of seating that suggested some guests mattered more than others. I was backstage reviewing my speech notes when my assistant found me. "Your family just arrived. Separately, but they're all here. Thought you'd want to know." My hands tightened on my notes. "Where are they seated?" "Middle section, different tables. Your father's with some volunteers he knows from the fund. Your sister is alone at a table that isn't full yet. Your mother is with some donors from the university partnership program." Not front row where VIPs and major donors sat. Not in back, hidden or ashamed. Just middle present, but not presumptuous. They'd understood the assignment. When I walked onto that stage 20 minutes later, the ballroom was full of 500 people who'd paid premium prices to support women's education. The applause was warm and genuine as I took my place at the podium, but my eyes swept the middle section until I found them. Sophie in a simple navy dress that probably came from the store where she worked. Richard in a suit I recognized as one our fund provided to volunteers for formal events. Eleanor in a gray dress with no jewelry, looking smaller and older than I remembered. They were watching me with expressions I'd never seen before, not judgment or dismissal or even guilt, but something closer to awe. As if they were seeing me for the first time and couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. I delivered my speech from memory, having practiced it enough that I could focus on connecting with the audience rather than remembering words. I talked about second chances and how opportunity lost didn't mean opportunity gone forever. I shared statistics about women who'd lost educational paths due to family financial crises, about the ripple effects of investing in one woman's education. I spoke about dignity, how it couldn't be given or taken away by others, only claimed by ourselves through choices and actions and refusal to let circumstances define our worth. 2 years ago, I said, looking out at the audience, I sat on a folding chair near a kitchen and someone told me only failures sat there. What they didn't understand was that dignity isn't about the chair you're given. It's about what you build when you stand up and walk away. Every woman we've supported through this fund understands that. They've stood up. They've walked away from circumstances that tried to define them, and they're building futures that no one else believed they deserved. The applause was sustained, genuine. I saw tears on faces throughout the audience, including when I let myself look on Sophie's face in that middle section. My father sat with his hands pressed together as if in prayer. My mother had a handkerchief pressed to her eyes. During the reception afterward, I moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and thanking donors, maintaining the professional composure that had always been my strength. I didn't approach my family and they didn't approach me, an unspoken understanding that this night was about the work, not about us. Then a young woman touched my arm, her eyes bright with tears. She was maybe 22, wearing a dress that looked new and carefully chosen. Ms. Wallace, I'm Christina. I received a scholarship last year. Christina. I remembered her application, a brilliant student whose college fund had been lost in her parents' contentious divorce, neither side willing to fund her education, because it meant the other wouldn't have to contribute. How's your first year going? I'm at the top of my class in biology, pre-med track. Her voice broke. I was told I wasn't college material, that I should just work retail and be grateful. Your fund proved them wrong. You proved them wrong. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the weight of her gratitude and relief and fierce determination. You proved them wrong, I corrected. I just gave you the chance. You did the work. From across the room, I felt eyes watching this moment. When I looked up, still holding Christina, I saw Sophie standing near a pillar with tears streaming down her face. Not the performative crying of someone seeking sympathy, but the broken, genuine tears of someone witnessing the profound impact of the sister she'd tried to destroy. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in her expression that looked like both pride and devastation. Pride in what I'd accomplished, devastation at what she'd almost prevented. My father stood near the donor tables talking to no one, just watching me with an expression that suggested he was finally understanding what kind of daughter he'd rejected, what kind of person he'd failed to see for 38 years. My mother sat alone at her table watching the easy respect people showed me, the way donors and recipients and colleagues all treated me as someone worth listening to. She was seeing what she'd sacrificed for petty favoritism, not just a daughter, but a remarkable woman who would have made any mother proud if that mother had bothered to look. As the event wound down and guests began leaving, I went to collect my coat from the check. The attendant handed me my coat along with 3 envelopes. These were left for you by 3 separate guests, she said. They asked that I give them to you at the end of the evening. I recognized the handwriting on each envelope, Sophie's careful script, Richard's businesslike print, Eleanor's elegant cursive. Letters, all 3 of them left for me to read when I was ready, whenever that might be. I held those 3 unopened envelopes and walked back into the now empty ballroom. The chairs were already being cleared by hotel staff, the tables being broken down, the transformation from gala back to generic event space already underway. I stood in approximately the spot where 2 years ago a folding chair had waited for me near the kitchen door. The room looked completely different now. No wedding decorations, no influencer friends, no performance of perfect family. Just an empty space that had hosted something real and meaningful, something that would change lives rather than just document them for social media. I looked down at the 3 letters in my hands, then back at that empty space where humiliation had once burned. Maybe some scars can become stories, I whispered to the silent ballroom. And then I walked out into the night carrying my family's words with me, not yet ready to read them, but no longer afraid of what they might say. I took the 3 letters home and set them on my coffee table where they sat untouched for 2 days. I'd circle past them on my way to the kitchen, glance at them while working on my laptop, see them in my peripheral vision like unfinished business demanding attention. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning with coffee and silence, I opened my father's letter first. His handwriting was precise, controlled the penmanship of a man who'd built a career on presentations and professional correspondence. But the words themselves were raw in a way I'd never seen from Richard Wallace. April, I need to tell you about the exact moment I failed you, though there were many. You were 16, sitting at the dining table working on a scholarship application essay. Your mother asked you to read it aloud, and you did something about women in STEM fields, about breaking barriers through quiet persistence rather than loud demands. It was brilliant, thoughtful, mature, beyond your years. When you finished, there was silence. Then Sophie, who was 13 and theatrical even then, said she could never write something that serious, that she liked things to be fun and light. Your mother laughed and said that was fine, that not everyone needed to be so intense. I should have praised you. Instead, I said, "Your sister makes people proud. You just make them uncomfortable." I said it because your quiet confidence intimidated me. You were 16 and already more self-possessed than I'd ever been. You knew what you wanted and pursued it with focus I'd never had. You reminded me of every time I'd given up when things got hard, every shortcut I'd taken, every compromise I'd made with my own potential. It was easier to call you uncomfortable than to admit I was the one who felt inadequate. When I took your college fund that summer, I promised myself I'd pay it back within 6 months. The business would turn around, I'd replenish everything, and you'd never need to know. But the business failed worse than I'd imagined. I lost everything, including your future, and I couldn't face your disappointment. So I created distance instead. I convinced myself you were difficult, stubborn, impossible to please. If you were the problem, then I wasn't the failure. I watched you leave for college with loans and scholarships you'd secured yourself. I watched you graduate without attending the ceremony. I watched you build a career in a field I didn't understand, and I told myself you were fine, you were capable, you didn't need parents the way Sophie did. I watched you become extraordinary and told myself it was despite me not. Despite my absence, because acknowledging my role meant acknowledging my failure. The truth is, you deserved a father who celebrated your strength, not one who feared it. You deserved someone who saw your independence as achievement, not as rejection. You deserved a parent who recognized that needing validation less didn't mean needing love less. I can't undo the past or give you back the years I stole through absence and cruelty. But I will spend my remaining years telling any parent who'll listen, don't mistake your daughter's independence for indifference. Don't punish her for being strong. Don't erase her because her success highlights your failures. I did all of these things and I lost decades with someone remarkable. Don't make my mistakes. Your daughters are watching to see if their strength makes you proud or uncomfortable. Choose pride. Choose presence. Choose to see them. I was wrong about everything. You were always enough, Dad. I set the letter down with shaking hands, my father's confession settling into the spaces where resentment had lived for so long. He'd finally named the wound, acknowledged not just what he'd done, but why, and the honesty of it hurt more than his years of dismissal had. I picked up my mother's letter next, surprised by how short it was, just 2 pages in her elegant script. April, I could write pages of apologies and explanations, but you deserve truth more than performance. I chose Sophie over you not once but thousands of times in small daily decisions. Which daughter's achievement to mention at dinner parties? Whose photos to display? Whose calls to return first? Whose needs to prioritize? Every time I chose her, and I told myself it was because she needed more help, more guidance, more maternal attention. The truth is, I chose her because she was easier to love. She praised me constantly, needed my advice, made me feel like I was being a good mother. You didn't need that from me. You didn't seek my validation or approval. You figured things out yourself, solved your own problems, built your own life. So I convinced myself you didn't need me at all, that your independence meant I'd already succeeded as your mother and could focus on Sophie, who clearly still needed parenting. I erased you from photos, not because I didn't love you, but because seeing you reminded me that I'd failed at the one job that mattered most. Every picture of you was evidence of my choice to prioritize one daughter over another, to give affection based on how much it was returned rather than how much it was needed. The folding chair at Sophie's wedding wasn't Sophie's cruelty alone. I approved that seating chart. When the caterer asked where to put you, I said, "Near the kitchen is fine." I put you there because I'd spent years putting you aside, and by then it felt natural. Putting you in the background had become habit. I have no excuse except cowardice and selfishness. I wanted to be needed, and you didn't need me the way Sophie did. I wanted to be praised, and you didn't praise me the way Sophie did. So I chose the daughter who made me feel good, rather than the daughter who needed me to be better. You owe me nothing, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even acknowledgement of this letter. But I owe you truth. You were always enough. Brilliant, capable, worthy of celebration and support, and unconditional love. I was the one who wasn't enough. I wasn't enough mother for a daughter like you. I'm sorry, Mom. I sat with both letters in my lap, feeling the weight of confessions I'd waited decades to hear. Then I opened Sophie's letter, the longest of the three, at 4 pages. April, I can list every lie I told, the Harvard claims, the stolen credentials, the fabricated achievements. But you already know them. What you don't know is why, and you deserve that truth, even though it's ugly. From childhood, I felt invisible next to your quiet brilliance. You got perfect grades without studying all night. You won awards without campaigning for them. You had this self-possession that made adults take you seriously, while they patted my head and called me cute. I was the entertaining one, the charming one, but you were the impressive one. When you got the Harvard scholarship, I was 15 and devastated. Not because I wanted Harvard, I didn't even know what I wanted, but because you'd achieved something so extraordinary that I knew I'd never match it. Everyone talked about it for months. April got into Harvard. April's scholarship. April's brilliant future. I felt like I'd disappeared completely. Then you lost it because Dad stole your college fund, and I felt relieved. God help me, April, I felt relieved that you'd failed at something, that you weren't going to have this perfect Harvard story that I could never compete with. Then I felt guilty for being relieved. Then I felt angry at you for making me feel guilty, as if your loss was somehow your fault for making me feel bad about being glad. I started taking credit for your achievements because I didn't think I had any of my own worth celebrating. Your scholarship became my opportunity I turned down for family. Your hard work became my dedication to excellence. Your story became my brand because I didn't have a story of my own. Each lie made the next one easier until I'd built an entire life from pieces I'd stolen from you. The folding chair wasn't about putting you down. It was about keeping you down, because I knew that if you stood up, if everyone saw you clearly, they'd see who was really hollow. You were becoming undeniably successful, and I needed to make sure everyone remembered you as less than me, as the uncomfortable sister, the difficult one, the failure. I don't ask for forgiveness because forgiveness implies I've earned redemption, and I haven't. I don't ask to rebuild our relationship because I broke it so thoroughly it may be irreparable. I just ask for the chance to build something real in my own life, even if you never witness it, even if it never benefits me in your eyes. You deserved a sister who celebrated your brilliance, who felt proud instead of threatened, who built her own success instead of stealing yours. I'll try to become that person even if you're no longer watching. Not for forgiveness, but because it's what I should have been all along. Sophie. I set all 3 letters on the table and looked at them together. 3 confessions from 3 people who'd finally understood what they'd done and why they'd done it. They'd named their failures, acknowledged their damage, taken responsibility without making excuses. It was everything I'd wanted to hear for decades. And yet, understanding didn't erase the years. Confession didn't undo the harm. Apologies, no matter how honest, couldn't give me back my Harvard scholarship, or my childhood, or the decades of family love I'd lost. They finally understood. But understanding doesn't erase the past. The question was, could I let them try to build something new from what they'd destroyed? 3 months passed while I carried their letters with me, reading them occasionally, feeling the weight of their confessions settle into something less sharp than anger, but not yet soft enough to be forgiveness. The monthly coffee meetings with Sophie continued, and twice my father joined us, the three of us navigating conversation with careful politeness. But something about those public meetings felt incomplete, performative in their very restraint. One evening in February, I created a group chat on my phone, the first time I'd ever included all three of them in the same message, and typed without overthinking it. Dinner, my place, Saturday 6 p.m., no expectations, no performances, just dinner. I added specific boundaries before sending, come if you want, don't if you're not ready, no photographers, no posts, no audience. This is private. The message was quintessentially me, clear, boundaried, honest. I watched the 3 dots appear as someone started typing, then Sophie's response, I'll be there. Thank you. Richard next, I'll bring wine. Thank you for this chance. Eleanor last, I'll come. I'm grateful. I didn't respond to any of them. The invitation itself was my answer. The week leading up to Saturday, I found myself unexpectedly anxious. I planned the menu carefully, nothing too elaborate that would suggest I was trying to impress them, but nothing so simple that it seemed like I didn't care. Roasted chicken, root vegetables, a salad, bread from the bakery I liked. Simple, honest food that required effort but not performance. I cleaned my apartment more thoroughly than usual, then felt foolish for caring what they thought of my space. I set the table with my everyday dishes, not the fine china I used for business dinners, because this wasn't a business dinner, and I didn't want it to feel like one. By Saturday afternoon, I was pacing my living room, wondering what I'd set in motion and whether I was ready for whatever came next. Sophie arrived first, 15 minutes early, her finger hovering over the doorbell before she finally pressed it. When I opened the door, she looked terrified, holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers like a shield. I know I'm early. I can wait in the car if... Come in. I took the flowers, genuinely touched by the gesture. These are nice. Thank you. She stepped into my apartment cautiously, as if expecting it to reject her. I put the flowers in water while she stood in my living room, not sitting, not touching anything, just existing in the space with visible discomfort. Richard arrived exactly at 6, carrying a bottle of wine that was nice but not ostentatiously expensive. He nodded to Sophie, then to me, and I directed them both to sit while I finished in the kitchen. The silence from the living room was heavy enough that I could feel it from the other room. Eleanor arrived 5 minutes late, apologetic before she'd even crossed the threshold. I'm sorry, traffic on the bridge was terrible. I should have left earlier. It's fine, Mom. Come in. She looked startled that I'd called her Mom, a title I'd avoided for years, and her eyes filled with tears that she blinked away quickly. The first 30 minutes were excruciating. We sat in my living room making conversation that felt scripted, and false comments about the weather turning warmer, observations about traffic patterns, Sophie mentioning a new coffee shop that had opened near her apartment. No one knew how to act. The old dynamics were gone, but new ones hadn't formed yet, and we were all performing the roles of people who knew how to be a family when none of us actually did. I served dinner family-style, setting the dishes in the center of the table and letting everyone take what they wanted. It felt safer than plating individual servings, less controlling, more collaborative. At the table, silence initially dominated. The clink of silverware against plates was too loud. Someone coughed. Sophie reached for bread, then pulled her hand back as if she needed permission. Then Richard cleared his throat and asked, April, I read about Crownbridge's acquisition of that manufacturing firm in Ohio. Was that the deal you were evaluating last month? It was a genuine question informed by his own background in manufacturing, not performative interest designed to win points. I appreciated that enough to answer honestly. Yes, they had good operations but terrible financial management. were restructuring their debt and bringing in new leadership. Richard asked follow-up questions that showed he understood the industry, and I found myself engaged in actual conversation about market conditions and operational efficiency. Sophie listened, and when there was a natural pause, she mentioned that her social services class was covering nonprofit financial management. "It's harder than I expected," she admitted. "I'm learning that good intentions aren't enough if you can't manage resources effectively." I asked what she found most challenging, and she answered honestly about struggling with accounting principles. Richard offered to tutor her on basic financial statements, an offer she accepted with visible gratitude. Eleanor commented on the roasted vegetables, and I shared the recipe, explaining that I'd learned to cook properly only in the past few years, when I'd finally had time and space to care about such things. She asked careful questions about my kitchen setup, about whether I entertained often about my life in ways that felt like she was trying to learn who I'd become rather than remind me of who I'd been. Slowly, hesitantly, we found a rhythm. Not the family we'd been, that family had been broken from the start, but something new, fragile and tentative. The conversation flowed in fits and starts, moments of genuine connection, followed by awkward silences. But the silences felt less hostile than they had at the beginning. As dinner wound down and I was clearing plates, Sophie suddenly set down her fork and said, "I need to say something." The table went still, tension immediately returning. "I know we're all pretending everything is fine, but it's not, and that's okay." She looked at each of us, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. "April, you've given us more grace than we deserve by having us here. But I don't want to pretend we're fixed. We broke something and maybe it can't be fully repaired. But maybe we can build something new from the pieces, something honest this time, instead of whatever performance we were doing before." Richard nodded slowly. "Agreed. I don't want to waste this chance with fake pleasantries and surface conversation. If we're doing this, let's do it honestly." Eleanor was crying quietly, but she nodded too. "I don't want to pretend anymore either. Pretending is what got us here." I sat back down, surprised by their directness, grateful for it. "Then let's agree on some things. No pretending. We'll be honest even when it's uncomfortable. We'll respect boundaries, mine especially since I'm the one who was hurt most. And we'll accept that some damage is permanent. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust you again. I don't know if we'll ever be a normal family. But maybe we can be something real, even if it's different." "Something real," Sophie repeated softly. "I'd like that." As they prepared to leave an hour later, coats retrieved and thanks expressed, Sophie turned back at the door. "Same time next month." I paused, feeling the weight of that question, the commitment it implied. Then I nodded. "Same time next month." The monthly dinners became a fixture, each one slightly less awkward than the last, and over the course of 2 years, something unexpected happened. My family's transformation began inspiring others beyond our small circle. The Seat at the Table Fund had grown exponentially, awarding $15 million in scholarships to 400 women whose educational dreams had been deferred or destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. The folding chair moment, which had once been a symbol of my humiliation, had evolved into something larger, a cultural touchstone for dignity in the face of dismissal. My publisher had approached me a year earlier about writing a book. I'd refused, initially uncomfortable with the idea of capitalizing on family pain or positioning myself as some kind of guru. But she'd persisted with a different angle, not a revenge memoir, but a practical leadership guide for women facing the kinds of barriers I'd overcome. After months of consideration and encouragement from my business partner, I finally agreed. Building Your Own Chair, A Guide to Dignity, Success and Self-Worth. Published that spring, and I braced myself for criticism that I was exploiting the viral moment. Instead, the book found an audience I hadn't anticipated: women over 50 who'd been told they were past their prime, who'd sacrificed careers for family and now felt invisible, who understood what it meant to be underestimated and dismissed. The book offered practical strategies for rebuilding professional identity, navigating ageism and sexism in the workplace, and claiming space without apologizing for occupying it. Book clubs across the country selected it for discussion. Universities assigned it in women's leadership courses. My publisher scheduled a book tour that I approached with deep reluctance, but the audiences that showed up, packed venues full of women who saw themselves in my story, made the discomfort worthwhile. They didn't want revenge narratives or dramatic confrontations. They wanted to know how to build power quietly, how to succeed without seeking constant validation, how to walk away from people and situations that diminished them. "You showed us that dignity is a choice," one woman told me at a signing in Boston. "Not something given or taken by others, but something we claim for ourselves." Sophie attended one of my book events in our hometown, sitting in the back row as she'd done at the scholarship ceremony years before. Afterward, she approached nervously holding a copy of my book. "I'm using this as inspiration for my capstone project," she said. "My paper is about redemption through service rebuilding after public failure. I'm writing it anonymously using my own story but not naming anyone. Would you be okay with that?" I studied her face, looking for signs of exploitation or performance, and finding only genuine uncertainty. Why anonymous? Because it's not about getting credit or attention. It's about contributing something useful to the field I'm entering. My professor thinks it's strong enough to submit to a national social work conference. "Then use your real name," I said, surprising both of us. "Own what you did and what you're becoming. That's how real change happens, Sophie. Not by hiding from your past, but by showing others that transformation is possible." 3 months later, Sophie called me from a conference in Atlanta, her voice shaking. I presented my paper. I used my real name and told the whole story, the fraud, the lies, the family betrayal, all of it. April. I thought they'd reject me or see me as a cautionary tale, but so many people came up afterward sharing their own stories of failure and rebuilding. One woman said my honesty gave her permission to forgive herself for her past mistakes. I never thought my worst moments could help anyone. "That's what happens when you stop performing and start being real," I said. "Your mistakes only have power when you hide them. When you own them, they become teaching moments." Around the same time, my father approached me with a proposal during one of our monthly dinners. "I want to start a project," he said carefully. "Interviewing fathers who've damaged or lost relationships with daughters through pride, favoritism, or inability to see them clearly. I'd compile their stories, their regrets, their advice for men trying to repair what they've broken. I thought it could be a resource your fund distributes." I was skeptical. "This sounds like you're trying to make yourself feel better about your failures." "Maybe partly," he admitted. "But also, I wish someone had shown me what I was doing before it was too late. If I can help even one father avoid my mistakes, that's worth the discomfort of facing them publicly." I allowed him to work under the fund's umbrella with the understanding that I'd review everything before distribution. Over the following months, Richard conducted interviews that were clearly painful for him, sitting across from men who described the exact patterns he'd exhibited, hearing his own excuses and rationalizations repeated by strangers. He compiled their stories with brutal honesty, creating a guide that didn't offer easy redemption, but did offer paths forward for men willing to do the work. One father who'd read an early draft sent Richard a letter that he shared with me. "I saw myself in every page the way I dismissed my daughter's quiet achievements, while celebrating my son's loud ones the way I made her independence feel like rejection instead of strength. Your interview saved my relationship with my daughter. I called her, apologized specifically for things I'd never acknowledged before, and we're rebuilding. It's slow and hard, but it's happening. Thank you for having the courage to expose your own failures so men like me could recognize ours." Richard showed me the letter, not seeking praise, but wanting me to know his work was reaching people, making a difference. I read it twice, then looked at my father, this man who'd hurt me so deeply, and was now trying imperfectly but genuinely to prevent others from making his mistakes. "Keep going," I said simply. "This matters." The monthly dinners continued, the book tour stretched into a second leg due to demand. Sophie graduated with her associate degree and transferred to a 4-year university for her bachelor's in social work. and my father's interview project expanded beyond what either of us had anticipated. We weren't a normal family, we never would be, but we were becoming something real built on honesty instead of performance. Then my assistant forwarded me an email that would test everything we'd built. A major television network wanted to produce a documentary about our journey. The Folding Chair. A family's journey from betrayal to healing would follow our story from the wedding through the present day, examining how public humiliation had catalyzed transformation for all of us. The producer's pitch was thoughtful, promising editorial integrity and a focus on genuine healing rather than manufactured drama. But the question at the end made my stomach clench. We need all family members to participate. Without everyone's involvement, we can't tell the complete story. Would you be willing to discuss this with your family? I stared at that email for a long time, thinking about privacy and exposure, about the difference between living your healing and performing it for cameras. We'd worked so hard to build something real in private. Could it survive being made public again? I forwarded the email to our family group chat with a single question: thoughts. Within an hour, 3 responses appeared, and I realized we'd have to make this decision together, not as the broken family we'd been, but as the imperfect, honest one we were slowly becoming. The responses to my question came quickly. Sophie wrote, "I'm terrified, but if it helps even one person, I'll do it." Richard replied, "Whatever you decide, I'll support." Eleanor simply said, "I trust your judgment." I called a family dinner specifically to discuss the documentary, and we sat around my table with the producer's proposal printed out in front of us. The conversation that followed revealed how far we'd come and how fragile our progress still felt. "I'm terrified," Sophie admitted, echoing her text. Talking about my mistakes in therapy or at conferences is one thing. Having them filmed and broadcast to millions is another. "People will judge me all over again." "They're already judging you," Richard said gently. "The story is out there. This is a chance to show what came after the work you've done, the person you're becoming." Eleanor, who'd been quieter in our family gatherings, spoke up. "I don't want to relive my failures publicly, but I also don't want other mothers to make my mistakes. If seeing me admit what I did helps even one woman choose differently, maybe that's worth the humiliation." I listened to them work through their fears, then shared my own. I've spent my entire career valuing privacy and discretion. Everything in me resists putting our family dysfunction on display. But maybe someone watching needs to see that families can break completely, work incredibly hard, and build something new, even if it's different from what they had before. We agreed to participate with strict conditions, complete editorial honesty with no sugarcoating or manufactured redemption arcs, a focus on genuine change rather than scandal, and my final approval of the cut before it aired. The producer agreed to everything, and 3 months later a film crew became part of our lives. They filmed me at Crownbridge Holdings conducting a board meeting with the same authority I'd brought to taking over my father's company. They captured Sophie in her college classroom taking notes on trauma-informed care, then at the women's shelter listening to a resident's story with patient attention. They followed Richard as he interviewed another estranged father for his project, both men crying as they discussed the daughters they'd failed. They even filmed Eleanor in therapy sessions, where she worked through the guilt of choosing one daughter over another. But the most powerful filming happened when we returned to the Grand Meridian Hotel, specifically requesting the same ballroom where Sophie's wedding had taken place. The space was set up for one of our scholarship galas, and the crew filmed us sitting at a round table together, no head seat, no hierarchy, just 4 people who'd been broken and were slowly, imperfectly mending. The interviewer, a woman who'd clearly done her research, asked me, "April, how does it feel to sit in this room after what happened here?" I looked around the ballroom, remembering the folding chair and the humiliation, then looked at my family seated with me at this round table. It feels like I finally have the seat I built for myself, and I invited them to join me. That's the difference. This time it was my choice. They filmed Sophie speaking directly to the camera, not in the polished influencer voice of her past, but with raw honesty. I built a life on lies because I thought external validation would fill something broken inside me. It didn't. It made everything worse. To anyone watching who's tempted to exaggerate or steal credit or fabricate achievements, it's not worth it. The truth always comes out, and when it does, you'll have lost yourself along with everything else. Richard broke down completely when discussing the college fund he'd stolen, his face in his hands as he sobbed. I took my daughter's future and blamed her for making me feel guilty about it. What kind of father does that? I can't undo it. I can't give her back those years. All I can do is spend my remaining time trying to prevent other fathers from making the same mistake. Eleanor's interview was quieter, but no less devastating as she admitted her active role in my erasure. I chose comfort over courage. I chose the daughter who made me feel good over the daughter who needed me to be better. April didn't need my validation, so I told myself she didn't need my love. I was wrong. Every child needs their mother's love, even the strong ones. Especially the strong ones. The footage was raw and painful and completely honest in ways that terrified all of us when we watched the rough cut together. But it was also real, and that mattered more than comfort. The documentary premiered 6 months later on a major streaming platform with the title, The Folding Chair, Dignity, Betrayal, and Building Again. Critics called it unflinchingly honest, and a roadmap for family healing without toxic positivity. The Hollywood Reporter wrote, "This isn't a feel-good redemption story. It's a clear-eyed examination of how families break, and the years of hard work required to build something new from the pieces." The public response was overwhelming. Women shared their own folding chair moments, times they'd been dismissed, overlooked, or humiliated by people who should have celebrated them. Fathers reached out to estranged daughters, some using Richard's words from the documentary as a template for their own apologies. Mothers confronted their favoritism. Families began difficult conversations they'd been avoiding for years. Sophie's phone flooded with messages from women thanking her for showing that redemption was possible. But not easy, that transformation required years of unglamorous work without guarantee of forgiveness. Richard received letters from men who saw themselves in his failures and were determined to change course before it was too late. April's fund received record donations, and applications from women seeking scholarships tripled. The documentary didn't make us famous in the way Sophie's influencer career had. There were no brand deals or sponsored posts. But it made us useful. Our pain, our mistakes, our years of difficult work became a tool for other people's healing. That felt infinitely more valuable than any performance ever had. The network organized a premiere party at the Women's Museum in Washington, D.C., the same museum that housed the leadership exhibition. They'd kept my original folding chair as part of the permanent collection, and during the party, they asked me to place a commemorative plaque beside it. I stood in front of that metal chair, the one that had been meant to diminish me, surrounded by family who'd hurt me, and spent years earning the right to stand beside me now. The plaque was simple brass with words I'd written myself. Every woman deserves her own seat. Build it, claim it, defend it. Sophie stood to my right, tears streaming down her face as she watched me place the plaque. Richard stood to my left, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in silent acknowledgement. Eleanor stood slightly behind, present, but still learning her place in this new family dynamic. A journalist approached as the ceremony concluded. "April, what do you hope people take away from your story?" I looked at the folding chair, then at my family, then at the crowd of people who'd come to celebrate transformation rather than scandal. That dignity isn't given or taken by others. It's something you build for yourself, one choice at a time, especially when the people who should support you don't. And that families can break completely and still find ways to build something new, something honest, something worth having. It won't look like what you lost, but it might be better because it's real. As the party continued around us, I stood with my family in front of that folding chair, and for the first time in my life, I felt like we were finally sitting at the same table, not because they'd earned full forgiveness, but because I'd chosen to let them try. and that choice, more than any revenge or vindication, was the truest expression of the power I'd built. 5 years after the wedding, the Women's Leadership Museum in Washington, D.C. opened an exhibition titled From Folding Chairs to Board Chairs, Women Who Built Their Own Seats. When the curator called to tell me my folding chair would be the centerpiece I was confused I'd never kept, it never wanted to see it again. Then she explained that Sophie had retrieved it from the hotel's storage after the wedding, keeping it all these years as a reminder of who she'd been and what she'd done. She'd donated it anonymously, but the curator had traced the donation back to her. The exhibition featured 50 women who'd overcome dismissal and rejection to achieve extraordinary things. I was invited to give the opening speech, and my entire family planned to attend. Sophie had completed her bachelor's degree in social work and now worked at a nonprofit serving domestic violence survivors. Richard volunteered full-time with various organizations supporting father-daughter reconciliation. Eleanor had found her own path in quiet support, finally comfortable not being the center of attention. The night of the opening, I stood backstage while the auditorium filled with thousands of people. When I walked out and saw my family seated together in the middle section, Sophie in her professional clothing, Richard looking proud, Eleanor with tears already in her eyes, I paused. They all nodded at me, permission, support, acknowledgement of how far we'd come. I nodded back and began. 5 years ago, my family gave me a folding chair at a wedding. They meant it as humiliation. I received it as liberation. I told the story honestly, holding nothing back: the stolen college fund, the erased photographs, the years of dismissal, the calculated cruelty of that metal chair near the kitchen. That chair taught me 3 things. First, dignity isn't given. It's claimed. No one can grant you worth or take it away. Second, the people who underestimate you don't define your worth. Your choices do. And third, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let the past control your future. I gestured toward my family in the audience. The people who hurt me are here today, not because I erased their mistakes, but because they spent years earning the right to witness this moment. Healing isn't erasing scars. It's learning to carry them with grace. We're not a perfect family. We never will be. But we're real now, and that's worth more than any performance of perfection ever was. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, and I saw tears on faces throughout the crowd, women seeing their own stories reflected, recognizing their own folding chair moments. Understanding that survival and success were possible even after profound betrayal. After the speech, I walked to where the folding chair sat under museum lights, preserved as a symbol of something larger than my personal pain. Sophie approached first, crying openly. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I gave you every reason to." "I didn't do it for you," I said, honestly pulling her into an embrace. "I did it because forgiveness was heavier than carrying hatred. I couldn't bear the weight anymore." Richard placed his hand on the chair, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll spend my life making sure other fathers don't make this mistake. That's my purpose now." Eleanor stood with us, quieter than she'd ever been in my childhood, finally comfortable in a supporting role, rather than demanding center stage. The museum had carved my words into marble beside the chair. Respect begins where silence ends. Dignity begins where we build our own seats. Legacy begins when we help others build theirs. As we left the museum, evening sunlight painting the marble steps gold, a young woman approached me tentatively. She looked maybe 25, professional clothes, nervous energy. "Ms. Wallace. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I needed to thank you. I was given a folding chair too by my family, by my first employer, by society, by everyone who said I wasn't good enough. Your story gave me permission to stop waiting for their approval and build my own throne. I'm starting my own company next month. Thank you." I took her hands in mine, seeing myself at her age, angry, hurt, determined to prove everyone wrong, but not yet understanding that the only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. "You're welcome," I said, meaning it completely. "Now go build something extraordinary." She walked away into that golden evening light, and I watched her go, finally understanding that the folding chair had never been about me alone. It was about every woman who'd ever been dismissed, every person who'd been told they belonged in the shadows, every soul who'd claimed their dignity when no one else would grant it. I'd built my seat. Now others were building theirs. And that legacy, that endless ripple of women refusing to accept the chairs they were given and building their own instead, that was worth every moment of pain, every year of struggle, every difficult choice I'd made. The folding chair had become a throne after all, just not the kind my family could ever have imagined. And that's where April Wallace's story brings us today. From a folding chair near the kitchen to a legacy that's changed hundreds of thousands of lives. Her story proves that the cruelest moments can become your greatest catalysts if you refuse to let them define you. So I want to ask you, what's your folding chair moment? When did someone try to make you feel small, and how did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below because I guarantee someone reading needs to hear it today. Your experience might be exactly what gives another woman the courage to build her own seat. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share stories like this every week. Real people, real transformation, real resilience. And before you go, tell me, do you think April should have forgiven her family or was letting them try enough? Was Sophie's redemption genuine or do some betrayals go too far? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Remember, dignity isn't performed, it's built. One choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one brave decision to walk away from people who treat you like you're nothing and build a life that proves you're everything. Thanks for listening to April's story. Now go build yours.